Alrighty, let's get right into it. Yo, how's it going, chat? We got a big stream today. Welcome to the Jake Don't Draw live stream wild experience. The I don't really have a lot of descriptive words for a crazy stream, to be honest, right now. I got Ramon Hurtado here, and we are critiquing the challenge submission for this past week. Ramon, what's up? How you doing?
Doing pretty good. Ready to, look through some compositions. I saw some of them on the Discord. They're looking really good. So
yeah, I was super excited. We actually have so many pretty crazy submissions this time. I mean, the composition challenge, people always go hard. It's fun. I'm always like, it doesn't happen that often because I want to participate, and I gotta make sure I have enough time. I would feel so bad if I did one of these and I didn't have enough time. But as usual, I always like to bring Ramon on, or I should have asked Devin too. Definitely for the next one, I'll ask Devin again. But I always like to bring someone else on because I'm learning this stuff too, and it's nice to have an expert on the scene. Ramon's done quite a few compositions. I'm sure you can see in the background behind him. This one was I'll go over the composition here. Let's pull this one up here into our announcements here. So the theme of this one was Temptation of the Sirens, which, loosely is about Odysseus, right? And the Odyssey. Now, to be honest, I haven't read the Odyssey. Ramon, have you read the Odyssey?
Not all of it. Had to read parts
in
of it in high school, but
okay. You're more cultured than I am. The idea with these is just to give everyone a prompt, just some starting point that they can latch onto and manipulate it in whatever way they want. There's also another fisherman's tale in here as well, like a nice poem that you could base yours on. The goal of these challenges isn't to produce some sort of beautiful, finished, polished piece of artwork. It's just to get sketching, to get started, to practice your idea at your ability to generate ideas, to design an image, and just create something that is unique and from yourself, because we all spend way too much time, just studying, and it can always be a little bit more than that. We can always kind of practice some of our skills. So these are comp sketches by Bouguereau. It's one of the greatest composers, at least one of the most prolific artists of all time. And this is what his sketchbook looked like, always coming up with interesting ideas. So that's kind of our goal here. And some of us are able to push it further into maybe more like the painted sketch stage. These are from the French Academy. This is from Ramon's research. He dug these up. These are really cool. Ramon, where'd you find these images?
a bunch of them from auction sites. So they come from different places, but because they had, fairly regular like composition contests, not only, basically every studio had something like that. Almost every teacher wanted their students to go on to compete for, the Prix de Rome or, some other thing like that. And so, you just find these droves of things, the official School of Fine Arts in Paris, they had a regular composition contest for, that was school-wide, apart from the ones they had in each studio. So there's just a bunch of these things around, and sometimes they come up for auction.
Yeah, and the idea with these was just to give the students, they did it once a week, or they did it quarterly, or maybe once a month probably. They just give them a prompt from the Bible, from classical stories like Odysseus, and just practice your idea coming up with stuff, and don't be held at all by your technical skill, right? It's kind of like painting. I was talking about this to Ramon the other day. It's like, I generally want to be kind of a hardline, more disciplined guy and tell people, draw for a couple years before you start painting. But Ramon, very nicely said to me, you can still practice painting even if you're not that good at drawing. And he's, very true. You can practice your ability to hit good colors and to design things well with paint, even if you're not that great at anatomy and proportion and that type of stuff. So just like with these, even if you're not that good at anatomy, proportion, or figure drawing or whatever, you can still practice your design, your composition skills. There's all sorts of people out there who are way worse than me at drawing academic figures, but are way miles better at making illustrations than I am. So it's always a good skill to practice, and yeah, it's super fun. So I think we can kind of just start hopping in. Oh, I do want to read one thing here, because I always like to read this. I read this in the last one too. It's a quote from Carolus Duran, who is Sargent's teacher. And if you don't know Duran, Duran is just a great artist, Sargent's teacher, and really, honestly, the hot take of the day, pretty much better at being Sargent than Sargent, because Sargent could only ever be Sargent, but Duran could be Sargent if he wanted to, but he could also be Duran and have a wider verse. But you guys can decode that one later. Duran, while talking to his students about designing a composition challenge on the prompt of Romeo and Juliet, said this: "What is Romeo? What is Juliet? It is not by reproducing this or that scene of Shakespeare's drama that you can paint these creations of his genius. It is in presenting them in their most striking aspect that you best convey the idea you have formed of them. If you represent only the griefs, the tears, the death of Juliet and her lover, you give but one phase of their existence. You have not expressed them. Before all and above all, they are expressions of love with all its youth, all its ardor, its heedlessness, its apprehension, and its delirium." So what Duran is saying here isn't really even just about the plot of Romeo and Juliet. It's about the idea itself of making a composition, of designing something. You're not just in a challenge like this. You're not just an illustrator where we've said, "Hey, I need this page of this book illustrated with this scene and this characters." You're here to create a story, to tell something, to represent a wider aspect. Yeah, do you have any thoughts on that, Ramon? You were the one who found this quote too.
Yeah, I think it's number one, I agree. Carolus Duran had significantly broader range than Sargent. They hired him to paint. Actually, Sargent helped him on this, but they hired him to paint a ceiling that I think was at the Louvre. It was the glory of Mary de Medici. It was pretty incredible. But in any case, what I think is useful about that passage, and for anyone that's interested, it's worth reading the entire article. In fact, there's I think more than one where students just wrote down what he was saying and his thoughts about not just painting but also composing images and all that. And it's just striking to see how these artists were driven by things that really go beyond just what people associate with them, which is these I don't know, it's these artists get reduced to what technique did they use, or what kind of brush did they use, or whatever, when those things are a lot of the time largely inconsequential, and their sort of deepest concerns are about storytelling, connecting with other people, right? And not just oh, where does a scapula go, but rather things am I creating this emotional experience for other people to have, and am I conveying what I want to convey? It's much more human than worrying about oh, what kind of palette or what kind of brushes am I using or whatever. Those things have their place, but it's a relatively small place in the grand scheme of things. So I think it helps you to keep things in perspective and remember what this is all for. Yeah,
definitely. Okay, cool. Let's hop right into some of these critiques. So we've had a huge amount of submissions here, and let me go to the critique submissions. We're just gonna loosely work our way from top-ish to bottom and kind of just work on things from a super beginner idea down to, or beginner ideas more towards the more finished, higher level stuff that we're going to talk about. But it's all pretty loose, and we'll just try to, string together some of this stuff. We had really great amount of submissions, 63 or so. Some people are doubled up. They've sent a couple messages in here, but probably about 40 or 35 paintings, if I had to guess. And yeah, I'm just thoroughly impressed by everyone on this. It's super fun to see. Oh, cool. Very good. So I will pick one. I'll go first. Yeah, we could probably take Mr. Northwest here. I think this is a good idea. Maybe we could take this one too. Okay. Yeah, I'm going to take Mr. Northwest here.
Right.
I did one for this too. I'll make Ramon talk about it at the end so you guys can see me get roasted. But this was it. All the other can surround. Truly realistic technical skills clearly would begin after for more in-depth stuff. Trying to read chat, but it's too hard to break the flow of things. All right, let me think. So when I approach this stuff, I'm first thinking, what are like the big ideas? It can be helpful too to just sit down and write down a few words about this stuff to think about like what are the themes of this, right? So the story, by the way, of Odysseus and the siren, temptation of the siren. Odysseus, I think, is told by an oracle or someone that there will be these sirens when he crosses through this area. They're going to try to lure him in. If they do lure him, he's going to die. So he has all of his men stuff their ears with wax so that they can't hear anything. And then Odysseus is chained to the center mast of the ship, and he tells his men, no matter how much I beg and plead, do not let me go. Strengthen my shackles more if I ask to be let go. And he wants to hear kind of the call of the sirens. The sirens are sometimes depicted as like mermaid, sea creature type things, and the other half of the time they're depicted as flying bird creatures. I don't actually like harpies. I don't know exactly why. In the Greek vases, they're depicted as harpies. I'm not sure if they're depicted as sea creatures then too. Sometimes weird stuff like that happens. So when I'm thinking about this stuff, I think there's this obviously temptation, desire, maybe curiosity are these big themes that come through, resistance, and we obviously have this super strong image of Odysseus tied to the ship. That's obviously one thing we can do, and we can see examples of that as well in some of the examples I gave here. Right, so we have Waterhouse here, painted a fantastic Odysseus. And this one, they're bird creatures with the typical Waterhouse head that he puts on every single woman in every painting. He only learned how to paint one head. This is a fantastic one, super fun. This is Fisherman and the Sirens by Leighton. I think this is based on the poem that I sent. We have this old Greek vase too, so again depicting kind of that same scene, people rowing through, and the birds attacking them. Is there anyone with... Yeah, we have these ones too. This is a much more classical or subtle, quiet one. So we have a lot of options too. This one's very like Rubenesque, and it's drama and figures. This is a great... Oh, Ramon, do you know Draper, right? Draper painted this. Is that the right name?
Yeah, Herbert Draper. Mm-hmm.
Herbert Draper. Great painter. This one's excellent, coming out of the water, super dynamic. So you can depict this in a lot of different ways, right? Like the more subtle one-on-one scene of the fisherman, you can do more of the classical way if you want. You can do things that imply it. You can have the drama right there, smack dab in the middle if you want. There's a lot of different ways that you can approach this. And the best way to start that, of course, would just be to make a few small sketches. So 2 by 3 inches in your sketchbook, and you don't want to like draw too hard. You don't want to try to figure out like the construction of a head or something. You want to just use big shapes. Think about how things are organized in their canvas. If you just have like one person here and then like a harpy here, is this really like that good of an arrangement of things? Like what could I use to tie together elements to make a sweeping motion through the painting, or to come around and have this arcing motion, or to have a big triangular composition? Maybe there's one man in the center on the mast, right? And then you have a harpy here and a harpy here, right? Now you have more of this triangular composition with symmetry on either sides. That might be a good idea. It might not be. There's no such thing as good or bad composition. It's just composition that serves its purpose. Get my right brush. So for this one, I think we obviously have this super dramatic triangle here, sweeping through here. And one thing we can consider when we think about this stuff is, where is our camera? If we are like a movie or a director, would this be better from a low down angle where we're, looking up at him while we have the harpies coming in on his sides, and we got these guys rowing on either side of him? Would that be more interesting? This top-down perspective, I'm not saying it's bad, but always one thing to consider too, how we are looking at these things. I like this kind of big, strong triangle. So this is the big idea of this composition. Feeds in this way, and then we're split very symmetrically down the middle, which is not inherently bad. All of these leading lines. I think, to me, when I look at this, I'm seeing this area feels very blank, and so does this area. We kind of have some big blank spaces that could use some sort of element to tie them back in together. One thing that a few later submissions did really well was they used the sail of the ship in a nice like arcing motion. Soroya does this really well in a few paintings. They'll have like kind of this blowing sail of the ship coming through, and that can help kind of redirect some of that. And then also, ships have tons of rigging of these ropes that run around in the background behind. I don't actually know what they connect to. I've never been on a sailboat in my life. So you don't really, if you are making like a really serious painting, part of it is learning about every single little thing and getting those details in there. When you're just doing stuff like this, you can just throw stuff in that seems like it might be somewhat plausible and just design the image as best as you can. So the sails and the ropes are really nice compositional devices. Yeah, a bunch of people did that. So just, throw some ropes in everywhere. Why not? And then here, we'll bring this person in front of the sail. Yeah, and we can bring this person in front of this rope. I think already we're starting to fill this in a little bit better. The perspective of this ship, it feels like it's pulling back a little bit too quickly. Like we're in like a fisheye lens. But if we are in a fisheye lens, I think we wouldn't be seeing this figure quite so much. And I think if we pull back on a little bit of the dynamicism of this boat, maybe it's more like this. And I'm no perspective expert. You guys are, see my creative sketching sometimes. It's definitely my weakest skill, so. We had this ship a little bit more like this. And then I like using kind of these waves as compositional devices as well. So they would have kind of this maybe splashing motion coming up, which you do a good job at. But maybe we could take some time too and just think about, like what is like a nice shape for these waves. Without scribbling quite so much. And I think it's always nice too while you're working on these to kind of just keep zooming out. What else could we do to improve this? So I think now we could need like a little bit of rhythm. Maybe keep this really circular, dynamic movement that keeps spilling everything back out. I like this too. This is a really nice detail. Thinking of stuff like this, that's like a subplot in your painting. This, it looks like the rope is kind of slipping off here and he's getting out. That's a nice little subplot that you can find. And maybe we should have something that points to that. His head looks like it's turning in and he put extra detail in his head. So maybe that's what that's for. We bring these out. Do boats have oars that come out further? So if this guy's over here, then this guy's head is probably going to be similar over here. And let's think here. So we have this rope. It's kind of slipping off. How can we hint at that? We could have kind of like a spool of rope on the ground too, or just some like trailing rope. Maybe that had slipped off of him. Yeah, I like this idea. What do you think, Ramon, about this? I know you're pulling up the next one, but
yeah, I like the looping movement, like with the sirens going around. I feel like I don't know. It depends on the feeling. Like I feel like in a sense, if it was going to be more threatening, it's like you could put more sirens along the path, so that it feels like they're kind of like overwhelming him, or like they're being like encircled. You know, maybe like some like coming in from like out of frame or that kind of thing. I do like I like that Odysseus is made the center of it, but the ship is not itself is not centered. It's like slightly tilted to the side. It kind of breaks the monotony a bit. Mm-hmm. But yeah, one thing that, you know, I was encouraged to try, like when I was in school for composition, and one thing that I try to do now is like sometimes just more stuff. Like, especially when someone's just like imagining a scene, very often they'll make it really barren and really empty.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's useful to just like keep doing more and just kind of like clutter it a bit, and then you can start like decluttering. But it's not usually the impulse that people have, you know. Most of the time people will just have like kind of like isolated things on like a big blank space. You know, so it's like if there's an impulse to, let's say, like show more of like the chaos of the scene, or like how overwhelming it is, then I think that's you know, it's at least worth trying, like just to get like more elements in there.
I got a harpy. This is either a guy going overboard or it's a harpy coming out of the water. You can choose on that one. Yeah, I think that's great. And like little bits of set dressing are always helpful too. Like what would be on a ship, you know, or how could we reinforce this idea that he's broken free, or maybe how could he have possibly broken free? Maybe one of the sailors is he's cast his oar aside. Maybe he's cast his oar aside. That oar could be going overboard. And he could have his hands clear up some room for myself here. He could be untying one with like a harpy at his side. Although the bird type of harpies, they're just not very... Well, I think the idea of the harpy too is that if you have wax in your ears, if you don't hear them, then you see them as these beasts. But to Odysseus, to anyone who hears their call, they are the most beautiful thing in the world. So you could have a harpy at his side. Maybe this is her claw feet on his shoulder. Like that, and he's untying them. You got to use your imagination with these, okay? Yeah, so I think just adding more stuff, looking for areas that are blank, and thinking like, okay, what motion, rhythms, move stuff around? How can I design it a little bit better? What can I do that's a little bit more, you know, maybe even where we have this harpy here, and she's kind of awkwardly interacting with the with the sail, you could have like a rip, and maybe she's got one of her claw feet up to insinuate that she just tore through the sail, right? So anything like that, I think, really could help improve it. And then the next step, of course, if you find one that you really like, you worked on a little bit, you're feeling good about the idea, do little sketches, but this time think about which direction should the light come from. How should the lights and the darks be organized in the same exact way of extraction that we are organizing, our big shapes and stuff. Higher view is like we're one of the sirens. That's a good idea too. Actually, that's kind of a nice, like, how does the camera relate to the story? That's interesting. Like the higher view too. Yeah. I love that they're in with the bird women as the sirens. I think it makes the most sense. Yeah, I think the bird women, it's an interesting story because to the viewer, the bird women they're scary, they're ugly, they're beasts, right? And it tells a completely different story. Ramon, I'm going to swap over to you for this next one.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Get your camera set up. You are on.
All right. Just one thing I was going to mention too, just from the previous one, is like, you don't always need to know like what everything is going to be like from the beginning. Like obviously you'll have like your story anchors, like elements that you kind of have to have in there. Like obviously that one needs like an Odysseus, and you're probably going to need the sirens. You're probably going to need a boat. You're probably going to need the ocean or the sea. But you can sometimes just like think like, oh, I need something here, and just like make some space or like scribble down something, and you can turn it into stuff afterwards. Like, there might be an area that feels too empty, for the continuity of the composition, or for like a path that you want to design. Maybe you just need like something in this spot, right? But you can just put down a something and then turn it into like a siren or a cloud or whatever after the fact. So there is an element in starting these out of just kind of like, just dumping out thoughts, and then, you kind of go through like different versions of the composition, like you were saying. Like you might like take a sketch, dump out everything that's in your head, see if any themes emerge, see if there's anything useful there, and then do another one, with that knowledge, and then just kind of keep going and keep kind of distilling it to the things that you really want to keep. So this one here is a different story. This is Sita Haran, Sita's abduction. Keeping the theme light today. So Ravana, seeking revenge for his sister Surpanaha's humiliation, plots to kidnap Sita. He enlists the help of the demon Marika, who transforms into a golden deer to lure Rama and Lakshmana away from their hermitage. So with them gone, Ravana, disguised as a mendicant, approaches the hut and asks for alms. Then when Sita steps outside the protective boundary, he reveals his true form and forcefully carries her away in his chariot. This graphic composition reimagines the pivotal moment when, the abduction of Sita by Ravana. In the center right, Ravana holds Sita by the wrist, dragging her away with clear aggression, his sword symbolizing threat and destruction. Sita, pulled unwillingly, tries to free herself from the hold of Ravana. Rama seen in the left background, cradling the body of Marika, the demon, who deceived them by taking the form of a golden deer. This moment visually captures the helplessness of Rama and the cunning of Ravana. Okay. So, and there's some other elements like the hut on fire and like the tree losing its leaves. So, here in general, like there are a lot of ideas that you're working with, and so we want to kind of have like a hierarchy of like what we want to focus on the most, right? Because any story, like any composition, you can approach in a variety of different ways. Like you could have something where you make the tree and like the kind of the idea of the changing seasons and the hut on fire, like basically their space being like invaded and no longer being safe. You can make this really big and make the abduction kind of like really small, right? If it's mostly about like the larger kind of what would you call it, like the larger theme, let's say, or like you could have this as like one of several tragedies that are happening, or you could, like focus on like the human scale of like, someone being abducted, right? With this stuff in the background. Now, as it stands currently, I think it makes a lot of sense to, if you're, because generally we tend to read, at least in the West, like compositions from left to right. And so having Rama all the way over here and her being sort of dragged along does create like this kind of sense of motion, right? Because you have like all the space that they've traveled through, and they're like exiting out, so they're going somewhere else. But I do think that one thing we want to work on is this can be like a little like diagrammatic. Like you don't want this to just be like, generally speaking at least, it depends. I mean, with composition, it really depends on like the story that you want to tell and how you want to tell it. This is what we would generally call like a frieze-like type of composition. You see this in vases and stuff like that, where you just kind of have like, it's almost like a comic strip. You're like, this happens, and this happens, and this happens, and this happens. And it just sort of is almost like an inventory of events, right? And so if you have things spaced out like this, it's not going to feel like you're at the scene. It's not going to feel like a kind of like, first person like witnessing of an event. It's going to feel more like this sort of, again, inventory like recounting of like going down like a grocery list of like things that happened, right? And so that's something that you want to consider depending on the emotional impact that you want it to have, or whether you want to tell the story as something kind of detached, where you're just like, well, this happened, and this happened. So one thing that I find really useful is to kind of like imagine almost like a chessboard, right? Like imagine that you have like just like something like that. You don't have to make it particularly neat. This one certainly isn't. And you can almost think of like the characters as like existing like on that chessboard, right? Again, you don't have to make like a super fancy sketch out of this, but even just a quick visualization of this, let's say like where these people sit, like where this guy would be, as he's like cradling that demon over here, where the hut is, and then where, Sita is being abducted. Just having like a little thing like this, like imagining the scene in 3D, will help you, because then you can imagine like, where's the camera then? Like, where is the viewer, right? And you can also even think of like, who is the viewer, right? So you could be like, oh, okay, it's like someone, the camera would be like over here, so they're just seeing like, Sita's abduction. Or the camera could be, over here, and they can see Sita's abduction along with, this stuff in the background. And again, it's useful to try to, Jerome would tell this to his students, like imagine the scene in 3D so that, you can sort of like rotate around it and try to find the angle that, presents the story in the way that you find most satisfying aesthetically, right? In terms of like form, in terms of like, just what it looks like, but also in terms of like the emotional impact, in terms of like, narrative clarity and things like that. Just because you mentioned here, just the, I don't know, just the kind of like brutality of this act of like, taking someone away from their home. You might want to play into that then, right? And so again, you kind of want to choose like, you have like a few competing kind of narratives here. You kind of want to choose which one's the main one that you want to focus on, and, to what degree you want to do that. So, here, the body language itself can change to a certain degree, because this is sort of like, as it reads right now, it's sort of like someone's kind of like reluctantly being taken away, but not like, it doesn't feel as kind of like desperate as it could, right? And so, you could have, for instance, if we just zoom in here, you can have like almost like more of the dragging, like you can have like, and if you want, you can show that it's more of a physical struggle. Like you can have him like with his arms sort of straight, like you have here. And maybe maybe like here his hand is like resting on like the hilt of his sword. Maybe you have like the leg more aggressively, moving forward. and you can have more of like a, more of a struggle. Like maybe she's trying to like, go limp. And so, she's like on the ground like this. Maybe she's wearing like some kind of a dress or something. Basically, the whole action of this boils down to like, let's say like, it's the dragging away, right? So that can become a visual metaphor where like the more you stretch out things horizontally in the composition, the more it becomes about like, just the being taken away. Like the longer the distance, sort of like the longer the dragging, the more painful the whole thing, will appear, right? And so if you're trying to evoke like a strong emotional reaction from the audience and show the horror of what's happening, then, let's say you have like her hair, let's say her hair's long and that sort of drags behind too. It's almost like every part of her wants to stay over here, but this, this person is taking her away from that, right? So the more you, take that theme and try to create like a visual metaphor for it, the more powerful it'll be. You can choose more of a side view like this, maybe like what you have already, or, and that'll emphasize again just that feeling of like the kind of the dragging. You could, tilt the camera a little bit and have like more of like the front showing. Again, if you have it from the side, that'll emphasize like everything that she's like losing and how she's being taken away from her home, and just the this will emphasize also like the resignation because she's almost like completely flat. Whereas if you were to show it more from kind of like the front, if you want to focus on him, you can have her as kind of like an afterthought, and then you can show like how, what like a horrible person he is for doing this. So it kind of depends, it's like, do you want to focus on like, her loss and how she feels about this, or do you want to focus on like, like his reasons for doing what he's doing, and like to have like, the viewer, feel a particular way about that, which I imagine would be negative, and then, have her like back here. So it's up to you, but I think you want to think of it in terms of like a more kind of, more of like how it'll register emotionally for the viewer, rather than just like, these are the facts, these are the things that happen. You can start with that, but again, in order to make like a really compelling composition from that kind of like gut punch point of view, then you have to start sort of imagining more like, whose story do I want to tell? Because there's several that you can, and how do I want people to feel about it? What do you think, Jake?
Yeah, I think that's really nice. Yeah, that's like one of the harder parts of coming up with compositions for your first few times, is like, how do you get that idea, or how do you? I mean, there's two things, right? Like one is how do I get an idea out that's not the most obvious thing in the world? That's not like the first thing that comes to my mind. And then two is, how do I get that idea out in a way that isn't like putting it down in the exact way that comes to my mind? Because the visual language is going to be different than the way that we think of it. Like the way we think of it might be more like a book where you see like that scene, and that might be kind of, it presents itself as like a frieze, or like an engraving or something that tells a story. You see that in Egyptian and early Greek art all the time. What's that big archway in France I'm thinking of right now? The Triumph.
Oh, I can't remember the name of it. Arc de Triomphe.
Yeah.
The Arch of Triumph, basically.
Oh, okay, yeah. I had most of it, but anyways, thinking about different ways that you can push those characters, or how you can move the camera, or any way. I think it takes a lot of practice, and that's what the sketching for. That's what doing lots of little thumbnails. Never go. I mean. I want to say never go with your first idea. Sometimes your first idea can be pretty good, but you should always put down a bunch of different ideas, as many as you can, and don't try to just do it all the night before it's due, too. Think about it for a day, write down some ideas. I'm looking at half of the chat right now. write some ideas, think about it for a day, and let those ideas develop naturally. It's not something that you can force. I probably only did. I got my sketches right there. I can take it back here. Boom. I probably only did. I'll go full screen. I only did, there was another page of this, so I probably did like 5 or so sketches, or 6 at the most. Like I did it in a day, but I did spend, I was the one who wrote the prompt and the challenge. And I did spend like 2 or 3 days just thinking about it because I didn't have the time working on videos. So it's something that you can always kind of turn over in your head and come up with ideas and then spend a session or 2 getting them down. And then you can go from there. Yeah, same. I always love my first idea the best. Honestly, yeah, I do too. Oh, go ahead, Ramon.
No, that can happen where like sometimes you will just connect with a story so much, or you get lucky that like your first idea, has something in it that you really want to keep. And sometimes you never visualize the entire thing, but sometimes you'll have like the seed of something or just like some element that's like pretty strong. And again, it really just depends on like how you feel about it. Like if you actually feel that this is the best that you can do, this is the clearest, like most like, this is the story that you want to tell and this is the clearest way to do it and the most impactful, then you just do that, right? But I think it is worth spending the time just, just trying stuff out because you're not drawing it in detail anyway. So like even just like the dumbest ideas that you have, or if you're like, oh, this isn't going anywhere or whatever, just give it a chance. Give it like 5 minutes, and just try to get something out. It'll either confirm that your first idea is in fact, more effective, or you might come up with stuff that you're like, wait a minute, this might actually be like a clearer framing for this, or even if you don't use the entire thing, there might be elements of it that you can use. But basically you just, try to vomit out, without too much censoring, just whatever kind of, pops into your head. Maybe you do a little more after that, and then you can sort of look at the mess and see if there's anything worth keeping in that.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Okay, cool. I'll do the next one here. Let me go to this one.
Jacob says, I feel like I usually have a kernel of a general idea, and then I really try to iterate on that with some different comps and such. That's usually how it works. The way that I was told about this by one of my teachers, Will Weston, was you go with what you know. It's like if you have a fixed element, if you have like a thing that needs to be there, start with that thing, or if you come up with an idea, you might have something that you're like, okay, this part I definitely want in there. And again, you're not going to know all the details all at once, but once you have an anchor, then you can kind of build around that. That's usually how it goes.
Okay, cool. I got the next one in here. Let me look at the Discordian that sent this, Maxi Waxy. I'm skipping over some people. We're just not going to do every single one. I'm not going to go perfectly in order. I'll also, probably tackle some of the easier ones to tackle, and I'll let Ramon work on some of the bigger idea stuff. So this one by Maxi Waxy says, Odysseus and the Sirens. Hey, you got to work hard. You're a high wage worker. Low angle shot of him tied up. I like that you specified low angle here. His crew are crowded around at work. The Sirens look down, lounging above. Okay, cool. I like that description a lot. Guys, please, if you're waiting for a critique on yours, write a description, please. It helps so much, even something like that. Because now I like that idea of the Sirens are they haven't struck yet. Maybe they're watching, they're observing, they are just thinking about, they're looking at them like they're toying with their food, right? That is a nice idea. So there's some stuff that I really liked about this. One is I just like this kind of like curve in him. So that's something that I thought about preserving. You also have like this kind of these points that are coming in here, and then you're right that you have like this watching and waiting. Oh, and I like how you're up on the mast here as well, or whatever this cross bow member thing is, and you got these like this crew. It looks like the God Hand from Berserk, but you got like this crew of evil, rough and tough Sirens that are kind of like jeering down at them. So I wanted to preserve some of that. Now, unfortunately, perspective-wise, this just doesn't make sense. Like, if this is where our horizon line is, because we have, like, this stuff coming inwards, that's fine. The lower this horizon line is, the more of, like, a worm's eye view we get. The higher it is, the higher up we are, looking down on the ground more. So that's an easy way to remember. If our horizon line is low, we're low. If our horizon line's high, it's high. This perspective doesn't quite make sense because right now, this mast kind of is slanting backwards at like an angle. And I like how you have this idea of these sirens sitting up and watching them. You would have to show it from a different angle, much more dynamic. It just wouldn't really make sense because he's tied to the mast and then the sirens are going to be above him. Maybe we could put... I like also how you have these cliffs on the side here. Maybe we could put those guys, watching from these cliffs. It's probably a little bit too large, right? They would be much smaller. But they could be doing that, from the sides of these cliffs over here. Then we'd have the rowers. And one thing, too, that I wanted to mention is that most paintings are like 3x4 horizontal landscape, right? But you can make a painting in whatever the hell shape you want. If you want it to be a circle and you want to do circular stuff inside of a circular frame, go for it. If you want it to be, this, that's fine. Just make sure that tells the story that you want to tell, right? So with this one, I like that you went for a vertical composition. I think there's not a lot of vertical compositions, and that's one of the first decisions you should be making when you have an idea is, do I want this in a vertical? Do I want this in a horizontal? If this was horizontal, you might be able to show more of the crew busting their ass to row through as fast as they can, and maybe that's the story. Where it's vertical, you're kind of getting more of that action of the sirens. So I took that idea of the siren kind of toying with their food, and instead I made that the focal point. This is him on there. I like this curve in there, so I was thinking about a way to kind of preserve that. So I was thinking maybe if he just had this like twist, right? He's got like his arms tied like this. His head is looking up this way. His body's kind of rotating more. His pelvis more this way. Yeah, maybe there's something there. I think it's a little bit weird now, but just work with big shapes too when you're doing this stuff, because I drew on the layer. Work with the big shapes when you're doing this stuff because, you don't got to work out the perspective of the body if that's too difficult right now. And it pretty much always is too difficult. If you just work with like a big shape, a big oval, something like this. Ramon calls it like a ghost. Like you put a bed sheet over your head or over your whole body, like a cheap ghost costume. I think that's a really nice way to put it. Yeah. And throw, some axes lines onto the face just so you know kind of which direction it's pointing. I like this. Now we have this motion that's coming up and it's meeting this siren, and then maybe, we could have some other sirens in the back here. Again, we could have that sail in the back. I won't overuse it on every time though, so I won't have it on this one. We have this centered composition, very stable, but instead we're kind of breaking that with this motion. And maybe even this wing could kind of come back a little bit more in perspective like that. And that would kind of keep reinforcing this wing that flaps up and leads our eye out of the composition. And then now we can look at this and think, okay, what's working well in this, what's not? Well, we have a lot of dead space in these areas, right? In here and in here. So something needs to happen in here. I like the idea of the cliff in here. Just not sure exactly what that would look like. We'll go with the rock shelf and all the sirens watching. I like that. And then we'd have some rowers. I like this one. These people are all a little bit too big. I like this one because we get the kind of main action like hero siren that is taking up the shot and all the drama. Let me see. I like the cold colors. I like how you did this with like a fun watercolor wash too, by the way. It's just a cool way to work. It's fun. Let me look at the chat here, see if anyone liked the vertical too. That might not work. Like he's trying to pull away but can't because he's tied. Yeah, I think that some of that twist gives us that. Something Sometimes I worry about too much dead space versus too cluttered. Got to find the balance. Yeah, I think that's nice. You're right. You know, it is hard to find that balance, but I think it's always easier to have a little bit too much and to remove it. You know, and you can really probably have as much as you want, as long as your rhythms through the painting are strong enough to kind of lead the eye in a certain direction, and your groups of values and colors are organized properly. Because you could always make a bunch of details in the background like more misty or foggy or less developed in order to defocus them as well. You know, maybe these guys would all have their heads down too. That would be a nice detail as well, just to show they're not interested in the sirens. There's the rowers. You know, what else could we do here? I have to put something here, I think. But it could even be a cloud or something too. Like, sometimes you don't need that much, right? Or it could just be, we could have another siren swooping in as well. Yeah, so I like the idea of this one a lot. What's a way that we could make that work? I like that idea of them like all sitting on that sail and watching down. How could we have that without having some sort of... The only way you could do that is if you had like a super worm's eye perspective where you're looking straight up. Or else we're going to have to pull the camera much further off of the ship. I guess, you know, you could have... If you pulled the camera further away from the ship... Let me... It's a little smaller. So if we pulled the camera further away from the ship, we'll keep it vertical because I like that. Oh, sticky keys. How is that not disabled? You know, maybe we can have the ship like this. We can have that mast. This is going to be way too big. There we go. Like this. And maybe this has got some sort of weird torn up shape or something. Maybe this could be torn and tattered. And then we have the sirens up there. And then higher up on the mast, we had him. And I'd probably want to make this all much, much, much closer. We have the waves breaking around here. You can have something going on in the background back here. Maybe you could have another, you know, harpy or two. Now, could have the people on the ship kind of right in here. That's the only way I can think of making that work. I really like this one with like their arms crossed. Like, The sassy siren. Yeah. Top down. Yeah, you could do a super high up one too, where you're kind of like, I don't even know. That would be crazy. How the hell is sticky keys happening? I swear to God. Wait, gotta turn this off, guys. Sticky keys. It's Isn't off. I'm just spamming my keys.
Is that the thing where like you press shift like 5 times or whatever?
And it makes that really annoying sound that's not used by Windows anywhere else. Too. I don't know. Yeah, you could have something like hyper dynamic like this. The top of the sail or something. That's kind of an interesting idea. I didn't think about... This is their arms crossed. And then their wings come out here. I didn't even think about that. That's a fun idea. So, you know, just perspective stuff and thinking about like where the space is. I love Ramon's idea of just thinking about a chessboard, right? If this is our ship and Odysseus is on the center mass, well then, you know, the birds would have to be right above him, right? And that mass would have to be right there. And then all the sailors are going to be here, 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 you know, across from each other. And then there's the front and the back of our ship, maybe some water splashing or our oars. So nice way to think about that perspective, and just maybe try it out in a few different angles, because there's a fun story here that could be happening for sure. I think that's great. Oh, you guys can hear the sticky key sound? Why? That's interesting. Okay. Yeah, cool. Ramon, you got one loaded up for us?
Yeah, I got two. I skipped around a bit, but they're kind of like thematically linked, and so I figure we can hop in on that. Let's see. Yeah, and again, like, you guys did a great job on these. This is really, really cool to see. Also, I've seen a couple people in there like apologizing for anatomical errors.
Yeah.
Yeah, you gotta stop thinking about it that way. You know, like, this is not school, you fucking nerds. Like, just relax.
Yeah, pretty much.
All right, so here, no, but seriously, like, I think there's a sort of a larger issue, but you know, you go through grade school and you get conditioned to, like, you know, you press a certain button, you do a certain thing, you know, stand up when they tell you to stand up, you sit down when they tell you to sit down, and then you get a good grade, you get a pat on the head, and that's how you know that you're doing a good job. That is not how making artwork actually works. There isn't going to be one answer to these things, and ultimately it's like you are actually the arbiter of, you know, what you want to say to other people. I mean, the only sort of utility of something like this is basically, like, what a teacher can do is to, like, help you to clarify your own ideas and make sure that you're actually telling the story the way that you want to tell it, and that, you know, there's nothing kind of getting in the way between you and telling the story you want to tell it. But it's not really about telling you, like, how to, or like what story to tell. You know, what story to tell, what point of view, that's on you, you know? This is more about, like, teaching you sort of, like, clear and effective communication so that you don't get in your own way when you're trying to tell, you know, whatever story you're interested in. But in any case, okay, so let me just go back to the text here. So this one says, wasn't happy with my other composition, got this. The man, a sailor, is being tied up by two sirens. He isn't resisting because their touch and voice calms him. Siren of the far right has been assigned to kill him, but she has grown feelings for the man, but the others don't know. I was thinking of adding skulls or bones around the pole to indicate that he isn't the first and to fill the space, but I'm not too sure. Okay, so that's interesting. So this is basically like a spin-off from the original story. So this is like a kind of, like, you know, ritual sacrifice that they're doing. So we're no longer on the ship. You know, this is no longer the ship's mast. This is, you know, like a pole that they have specially designated for murdering sailors. Okay, so again, it depends on how you want to play this. You know, I think I mean, the look at his face, I think, is great. It's like this, he's like in this, like, stupor, like he's just like, you know, not putting up any kind of a fight. It's like he's like at a rave or something.
When do I get laid?
Yeah, exactly. So it kind of reminds me a little bit of, like, it's a little bit like Midsommar, actually, if anyone's watched that. Okay, so one thing I would say is, like, the look on, like, at least two of these sirens is, like, pretty similar. They're also, like, I understand that because he doesn't really feel like a threat, you know, it's not necessarily like they're not going to be tying him up aggressively, right? Because they don't really have to. But I do think that, well, okay, again, this is like any other thing. Like, what we're zooming in on, or what we're zeroing in on, is that you have a theme going on here where there's basically idea number one. Like, he is, like, into it, right? So he's, like, you know, he's on board, right? And obviously these mermaids are on board with, like, murdering him. So, like, all the people over here are good with what's happening. The only one that's conflicted is the one over here who has, you know, like, fallen in love with the sailor, right? And so that, I think, is the main tension that you would want to explore because, well, I mean, that's the part of the story that you added, right? And so clearly that part is important, and she stands out because, again, everyone is kind of like on board, on board, on board. She's the only one who's like, no. And so you can decide from there whether you want to tell like the story of them, like the story of his, not resignation, but like his sort of like willingness to go along with his own like demise. You can see it as like folly or like whatever else. So there's that. Or you can focus on like the conflict that she's having, right? Because I imagine this doesn't happen to her every day, right? And so, whether you want to focus on her or you want to focus on them, I think, you want to make the sort of two groups as different as possible. So one thing that I would try here is maybe you could maybe even have like more sirens and get them closer to him, right? So let's see, I guess we can go ahead and draw on top of this. In terms of like the point of view and like I think in this case actually like having this like, this is a little bit freeze-like also, where it's like, 1, 2, 3, 4, like there's not a lot of like overlap. What I mean by overlap is like if you had something where, let's say, you have like a character over here and some characters like, way behind here and some other characters back here or something like that, right? There's a little bit more of like a lineup. In this case, I think that's actually like fairly effective. Again, there's no sort of like you always have to do this or you always have to do that. Again, as long as the story that you want gets told effectively, that's really all that matters. But let's see if, okay, we'll duplicate this and we'll just copy it over here on the side so we can have like a little side-by-side thing. And we'll just draw on top. So like, even just for this initial, sort of anchor, like, if she's seducing him, like, let's say that like, I don't know, her hand like is like outstretched like all like over like more of his torso, right? It's like the more, and I'm gonna draw this like, awful claw hand here, right? But like, part of it sometimes with this stuff is like making people do things like they actually mean it, A lot of our ideas tend to be like fairly like tentative, when we're like starting out. So like, go harder. Like maybe she has like not like a tentative touch, but like she's like, grabbing him like full palm, right? Grabbing as much torso as possible here.
You got to get a date to get some experience to act it out,
Yeah, research for your work. So let's say that she's like, whispering something in his ear. They sing, right? So like, what if she's like singing in his ear, right? Like, what would make this so compelling that this dude's willing to die for this, right? Like, and so you have to. One thing that I think is worth thinking about is like, you don't want to be a voyeur of your characters. You don't want to be like looking through a keyhole at your characters. Like, you on some level, if you want this to connect to the audience, you have to inhabit every character. Like, you on some level have to like, just like mind meld with each of these people in turn and sort of think like, what is it like to be them right now? Like what, like what would be going through his head? What would be going through her head, And, let's say like, okay, this like, this hand's wrapping around here. And there are some subtleties that you can include, right? This might not be the most important thing, but like, the way it is right now, like this feels like, okay, like straightforward, almost like, like seduction or lust or affection or whatever, right? But what if there's like a subtle thing that kind of like hints at you that something bad is about to happen, right? So like maybe, maybe her arms like just like a little too much around his neck. You know what I mean? Where there's like a kind of like suggestion that this might be kind of sinister. As far as him, like he might be like, leaning into like, like what she's saying or whatever, right? he might be like, like closing his eyes if he's sort of like lost in this kind of like, reverie kind of state. There might be like a little bit of a smile on his, just like a serene look or a smile on his face or whatever, you know. So anyway, let's say we have something like that, right? I would say also for the sirens, like, if you want it to feel like these are like supernatural creatures, then like, be careful that this doesn't end up just looking like pants, right? So like as you're designing the creatures, like, you can play up the contrast. This is sort of very typical for like mermaids and stuff, where like you make them, let's say like the top, like a very conventionally attractive woman, but like maybe something like to some degree more, because it's a whole like uncanny valley thing, right? So there's like something like more grotesque like down here, something very like alien or like non-human, right? So like playing up like, the fish part, would be useful. And you can do whatever you want with this, right? You can reimagine this as like, I don't know, what if they're like half person, half like octopus or something? You could have this just be, I don't know, tentacles or whatever. But I would say that like making them sort of like more, or like less human, at least like some big tell would probably be useful. So anyway, I like the pose with him, I think is good. I think even having him be a little bit more languid, like having like a little bit more curve here like that, might just show like how relaxed he is. And, let's say that maybe like, she's like, maybe this lady here is like even closer. Or maybe it's just like, I don't know, you just have like more sirens in general. So maybe there would be like, another one like over here. Like she's the main one kind of like, maybe keeping him distracted or keeping him like, in this like sort of like delusion, like, or in this like whatever state of like stupor he's in. But maybe there's like, say like, okay, she's looking at him, maybe there's another siren here and maybe she's more focused on her task, someone's got to actually tie him up, right? And basically by filling in the composition more, because they're acting sort of as a hive mind here, so like the only, they're just doing like what they usually do in this case, right? So if there's like a kind of ritual sacrifice, this is almost just on automatic. So let's say we fill this in a little bit more. Let's say there's a siren down here too that's, like tying up his legs. And again, you don't even have to decide like on the posture and everything just yet, like, but, maybe the sense that he's getting almost kind of like drowned or kind of like suffocated by just like how many people, like, make it feel like there's really no chance, right? Like that he just like, he's, completely screwed. And maybe this would be like, like hair streaming down, etc. The hair here, can be this like, sort of like interesting kind of like recurring element that like links different parts of the composition together, right? Yeah. And so, okay, we can have that. Again, maybe like making them feel like a crowd, right? And like they're engulfing him basically. So maybe she comes in like a little bit closer, right? So let's go ahead and do that. The thing about this stuff too is that like, you don't really need like storytelling, like you're already an expert storyteller because like everybody is, right? This is like how human brains work, like all we do is think about stories. And so, you just have to basically, you have to be a little bit like shameless or like whatever pops into your head, whatever like thing you can think of to like plus the story to keep it going, to like make it not necessarily more extreme, but like just kind of lean into like what you're doing. Like don't be afraid of like your own sort of like story ideas that you have as this comes up. And again, you are an expert in being a person, right? And so, you can draw on like your own experiences or just what you would think it would be like for someone to be in this situation. So anyway, let's say that again, it's like he's being like swallowed up basically by, these like creatures that are trying to kill him. Like maybe there's like, and maybe some of them are like sort of like over eager. Like maybe there's one that's like straight up like on the floor, just engrossed in like tying him up.
Also, one thing too, to jump in, it's something that like makes filling the space easier too, is before you hop into this stage to do some small value sketches, like, because something that came to mind when Ramon was like working on this hair, which I think is really nice, like having all the dark hair that's similar, it ties stuff together, that helps fill a lot of space and rhythms. And if you are not thinking about like masses of light and dark, and you're just trying to like put something, somebody said earlier that they're scared of adding too much. If you are just trying to like mechanically add every single, little a piece into everything, it gets a little bit too overwhelming to like try to fill up all the space and to think of all those different ideas. So that can be a really nice way to make things simpler, is just to think about which direction is the light coming from, or is it nighttime? Is this moonlight? Is this dawn? Is it day? How is that going to impact the image? And it's going to save you a lot of effort.
Yeah, exactly. And like when you pick up on, let's say like some element that like works in one place, you might try it out in other places too. Again, you have to sort of design the elements that you want in there, but you also have to give the viewer something of a path to go through it, right? It's like if you were designing a haunted house, you can't just put like a bunch of scary stuff in a room. You have to figure out a way to like take the viewer through that, because you don't like kind of show everything at once. So for example, like if you plop down all these elements in here, you still have to find some way to say like, oh. And again, the viewer's eye path, they've done like eye tracking studies. It doesn't actually follow this exactly, but it does create a more harmonious composition. Like you might have like this linking to this, linking to this, linking to this, and I don't know, you find a way to link all this stuff together like that. Basically, what you're doing is you're, again, providing a certain kind of like scaffolding so that these don't feel like separate elements, but you have a thing that ties it all together. So let's say that someone pointed out that I say a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering.
It's to emphasize that the answers are already inside of you. And you need those skills.
We love stimming here in this chat.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, let a neurodivergent king live. So anyway, so maybe you form like a larger crowd here, right? Now, I think here, okay, if she's she has to kill him, right? But she doesn't want to. If she's just kind of sad and like crumpled in a corner like this, it's almost like a little too obvious. Now, you might argue that like the rest of the sirens are so engrossed in this task that they're not even going to notice that she's like, over here, like, like crying about this. But, if they do this, and there it goes. If they do this all the time, where like they just ritualistically, like kill sailors or whatever, then I imagine that she has this much of a conflict because this probably doesn't happen to her very often. She's probably going to try to hide that, right? Because otherwise the other sirens will be like, hey, what the hell's your deal? Like, are you like ready yet? Right? And so there might be like a kind of shame or a kind of like, just a trying to kind of blend in. She wouldn't necessarily be so obvious in expressing this, right? And, from a storytelling standpoint, as it currently stands, it's hard to tell that she's sad about killing him, right? Unless you had like supplementary text, to explain that. And so how do you show that visually without having to explain it to people, with like a little blurb, right? What I would argue is that you can do this. Don't isolate her, but don't make her that different from the other sirens. So on some level, she's like, oh, I'm just one of the gals. I'm not. I'm almost ready. I'm not doing anything weird. I'm not having second thoughts about this back here. So let's say, and the way that you're going to show that she thinks differently and that she's first of all, that she thinks differently is she is physically going to be removed from the thing that's happening here, because that's her whole deal, right? Is like she doesn't want what's about to happen. So let's say you have her like this and she's turned away from the rest of them. So that visually confirms that, you know, like psychologically she's turned away from them because she does not want the same thing that they want. She doesn't even want the same thing that this moron wants, right? And so, you know, she's physically turned away because her mind is also turned away from like what they're doing. So let's say that we have her over here like that. And then what if this is maybe a choice where she's conflicted, right? Or, well, I mean, it is. But to show that, A, make the killing instrument bigger just so the audience doesn't miss it. But also lean on things that we already know, right? Like everybody knows that like hand wringing, you know, when you're like doing this kind of means that you're like, I mean, we even have the expression, at least in English, of like, you know, hand wringing is a way of kind of like negotiating with yourself or like kind of having that sort of tension when you don't necessarily want to do something or you're deciding. So maybe have both of her hands, you know, on this thing. And the look of distress, I think, is good here. How about, I mean, she's not, having the weapon in her hand like this is going to already signal that, you know, she is potentially going to kill somebody. But her looking in his direction kind of tells you who it is, and her looking sad tells you that she doesn't want to do it. Right? So like have her be in conflict too, like have her body sort of like turned away, but then, you know, she's kind of like looking over at him like sort of like longingly or something like that, you know, because you have her body doing like, her body and her head doing opposite things, it becomes a visual symbol for conflict, right? Like a contradiction that is, you know, obviously it's internal, but you have to externalize it somehow because, again, you're not going to be there to handhold the viewer through what's actually happening. So I think that might be something that can tell the story that you want in a way that requires no further explanation from you. So that's what I would go ahead and do. And again, you can even try like having like have a whole mob on them, you know, like have even more of them. So anyway, the other one that I want to take a look at was this one here. And it's sort of a similar theme, where, you know, there's this, let's see, yeah, I want it to be kind of like a seductive femme fatale thing going on. So I try to portray a sailor giving up to their charms. She's smiling at him, but her hands grab aggressively the back of his neck. That's really smart, and that's really effective, like having like one part of the character saying one thing and another part saying a different thing. Giving away her real intentions to drown him. His companions watch in awe and terror, trying not to hear their singing, sketch 3, while the other woman is trying to sink the small ship they're in. The positions and like the body language here is really, really like beautifully articulated. Like this is super cool. And even just like the staging here, I think is really well done. This is really cool also. Like it just, you know, I think sometimes it's useful to zoom in on like some small, significant, like emotional detail like this, because it's going to be such a big part of the composition. Like it is going to carry a lot of the emotional weight. However, one thing I would caution you against is like kind of getting like a little, like you get to have like a little bit of this, but you know, don't fall in love with that so much that you don't take any other like risks with the composition, or you feel like you always have to like, I don't know, like draw out everything in detail in order to literally just put an image on the page. So for example, you know, for these other characters, like you don't have to plan this out in a way that's necessarily this elaborate if it's just like someone who's, you know, plugging up their ears, or it's like a secondary character. You know, so I would say like, if you have to get it out and you have a good idea for this stuff, fine, get it out. But don't get too stuck in just kind of, you know, always drawing this in such an elaborate way. Because in a way, these are kind of not composition drawings. These are like little preview moments of what the final will be like. Couple things that I think you can build on here. So, and again, you know, if you have a really good idea, which you do here, then, you know, sure, get it out. You know, and then go back to like doing the sort of like simpler, more adventurous like composition drawing. But don't lock yourself into like just one single thing like that. So I think one thing that could be really effective here is, okay, you have like this main scene going on, right? And again, the way that you have like her arms around him and all that, like this is like top tier. This is like really fantastic. How about you have this, and then you have basically like a crowd reaction, right? Because you have, like you said, that you have like the or you're going to have like the other sailors like being like mortified that this is happening. If that's the case, like, you know, kind of give them a chance to actually be there. And I think actually having this, this is like fairly unusual in terms of like having this so closely cropped like this, but I think in this case it's like it's really effective. It makes it kind of like the walls are closing in on him, which, I mean, that kind of is what's happening. I think that's super cool. And okay, she's trying to sink their ship. Okay, fine. Maybe have, you know, a lot of these other sailors like clustered together here, you know, and they're you know, like you said, they're looking in horror. They're trying to like, you know, plug up their ears. Maybe you have like some that are kind of looking over here, one that's like looking over at their friend, you know, maybe one that's like, you know, turning away. He's like, oh man, I can't look at this, you know, etc. And then just like give these people to like a chance to like exist as a crowd. For the sirens, like you might just add like another one on here, like, you know, maybe one that's like, I don't know, actively pulling the boat down. You know, just give this a chance to be a little bit more than just like a kind of like a whisper. And you could have like, if you wanted to, you could have like a little bit of the ocean here, maybe even extend the composition a little further over here. And maybe even like, I don't know, kind of cram it with sailors. Again, in the West, typically, like, you know, most of us are conditioned to read things from left to right. And so generally speaking, like a composition like this might, you know, the viewer might skip around, but you gotta give them a chance to at least read it as like, okay, all these people are having a reaction. They're horrified. What are they horrified? Like, what's horrifying here? And then maybe you see like, oh, there's a lady hanging from this. Oh, is she drowning? Are they trying to save her? Oh, wait, no, there's another lady. Maybe show right about here that she has a tail. So you're like, oh, wait, hold on, it's a mermaid sighting. Maybe they're scared that it's a mermaid. They just learned that mermaids are real. And you're like, oh, wait, no, shit, this lady's trying to drown, trying to drown their friend. Oh, that's what's happening, you know? So you have like all the kind of setup, and then you have the payoff over here. And maybe I would say like including like a little bit of like the sky or the horizon, like maybe like just right around here, right around his eye level. That might be useful, in terms of like, you know, silhouetting him a little bit and almost forming like a little like vignette right here. But also kind of like, I don't know, the distance or the horizon as hope, right? Like hope that they could get away, that they could sail away from this scenario into like, you know, sort of the great unknown out here. But you make it really narrow so that they have very narrow hope, because they actually don't really have that much hope, right? So maybe something like that would be something that you could add to this that would reinforce the themes that you already have going. So anyway, that is my 2 cents, you know?
Sweet. You want me to step in here?
Yeah, take it away.
Sorry, I've just been playing Minecraft for the past 30 minutes. All right, let me swap over.
No, you've been composing a game. That's the
yeah.
Everything is composition.
True. Okay, cool. I've been doing a bunch of work on 2 of these. Let me pull up who they're by. They're pretty much mostly done with my suggestions, so I can kind of push through these quicker, and maybe we can try to pick up the pace a little bit. We've been going for an hour and a half or so roughly halfway or so through. Let's get to as many as we can. This one was Opium Dreams. So it seems like this person kind of combined it with something that they're personally interested in, which I love. I was inspired by the Opium Wars between China and Britain. with my main character as a Chinese siren who preys on British soldiers and warships. I modeled the ship in the background off a ship called the Nemesis, which was a British warship used in the wars. Cool. The siren looks defiantly at the viewer, inspired by Cleopatra by Waterhouse. Cleopatra Waterhouse. Actually, I gotta... okay. Oh, this is a great painting. Yeah, okay, so we get this like real sassy, dominating stare. This was my first serious composition. I really liked how it turned out, so I'm thinking I'll probably develop it into a larger painting, which is awesome. Also included some pencil sketches and initial thumbnails. Cool. All right, cool. So you're working out the pose and stuff like that. Yeah, I think this is awesome. This looks really cool. It's a fun idea. You're kind of doing some things that you're personally interested with, so that kind of is helpful. And the Impressionist, Monet color palette is being used very well here. I mean, this is well organized. Normally when you see people kind of throwing down some oil pastels with crazy colors, the values and the organization gets out of control. I'd say that this is pretty solid as far as like the separation between lights and darks and the color harmonies and stuff. Everything looks pretty good. So let's move over to Photoshop here. So I noted a few problems in this that I felt like could be improved. So some things that are working really well. Let me get back to this layer here. Is you have some cool things, right? So I like how these rocks are like swooping around, creating rhythms that dive back into the main thing, the main rhythm. The main compositional motion is like this triangle, right? It's this big triangle that builds into what we have here. And then I like these, I assume these are like little skulls or something. I like these build a secondary triangle in here. That's cool, looks good. There's lots of like nice, interesting shapes and stuff in here that are moving quite well. I felt like some areas that could be improved though, where like this space, it's a little bit, we have a few issues, right? I think this running kind of parallel to the top of her head, it puts kind of like a line across the painting like this. And if she is the most important thing, if she's the Cleopatra leaning back, really staring in, being, defiant and confident and strong. We want her to be the highest point because that's where our attention goes. And we're kind of splitting the difference here. And then also we have, again, a similar dead space issue over here where it's a lot of empty space, it feels like, that's not being used. And I think it's cool that you're, telling this story. What I want to see a little bit more is like, what's the connection between this ship and this lady, right? Like we have the skulls, that's true, but let's push that a little further. So one thing that I thought of was just rotating the ship so that it's coming inwards, right? Maybe full steam ahead towards the rocks, right? That could be an interesting idea. Got this, maybe this big cloud, this can be used. Can I get white? Wait, yeah, there we go. Compositionally. Got these big sails. There's our ship coming in. Right, maybe it's a little bit close, but I don't know. Fine. Waves could be breaking around it. Now we've created a little bit of motion coming in. This still needs to get pulled down a little bit. So what I did was I just reworked it so that she could be a little bit more strong and in the center of the composition. This like Banjo-Kazooie ass fucking Animal Crossing ass music is throwing me off. Every once in a while I just get... Here we go. So I placed her a little bit more center in the composition. I brought the ship down a little bit too, still heading inwards, but brought it down so that way we could ramp up towards the top of her a little bit. I was thinking too, we want to show what this lady does. Sure, we have some skulls, but how does she kill people? How does she get people? We could have some references, some feathers, maybe a nest, a bird's nest type deal to reference kind of her wings, her flight. Or what I thought too was these are like kind of broken planks from ships that have crashed ashore. So maybe we have some rocks down here, and then these are little planks that have from other ships that are seeing the exact same fate that this one is, right? And those are building out leading rhythms too, in the same way that the rocks are. So that just gives us a little bit of variety there, which I think is nice. And then I still struggled with this area a lot over here. I didn't know exactly what to fill it with. One thing that I did think was a half-sunken ship. I don't want to be too on the nose with it. We already have like pretty good implication with the planks here, but maybe just like the tip of a mast and a little bit of sail just coming out of the top of the water, right? Just a little bit of something. The scale of this doesn't make sense, but I still had this space over here I didn't know quite what to do with, but we could have another siren, maybe luring in a sailor way off in the distance or another rock. Maybe she's the one that's pulling them in, right? A little subplot or something. And then this area of the sky, I would do something either with clouds, with the steam from this, although I think this is kind of awkward. I don't know exactly how I'd manage the steam from the ship. But what I did was just throw some distant birds in the sky too, so that those are the harpies that are swooping in on that ship too. But just keep them abstract, keep them as simple birds. Maybe you could have one that's a little bit more detailed than the others, just to show that some more literary elements, some more story devices. Those are the guys that maybe she's baiting them in, they're attacking them, and then she's like, yeah, I'm the harpy queen. So that's an idea. I just got a donation from, in a currency I don't know, Blue Pine. Really love your work. I hope you do mine too. See, that's how you get a critique right there. Nothing but green talks in this chat. Thank you, Blue Pine. I really appreciate that. I'll try to get to as many as we can. So yeah, just a few things to keep, again, her up higher, making sure that we don't have like a bunch of stuff that's equally sized. It would be kind of boring if we had one ship on this side and then one ship on this side, and they're all equally sized as her head, and they're all in line with her head. We want her to be the strong, powerful central figure. So which ways can we enhance that rhythm? How can we, crop in around her a little bit, cram more interesting stuff into there, just so that it balances out a little bit more, right? And you can do that it doesn't have to be maximalist with a billion things going on in every section, right? Like this could just be like a little mountain in the background, right? Or it could be, I don't know. Maybe there's a way that you could make the waves splash up or something like that as well. If you just, or maybe even just the birds. You could have one bird that maybe you see that it's a little bit more of something more than just a bird, and then you have a couple birds just in the background. Maybe that would totally serve it as well. So you can be as minimalist or as maximalist as you need, but something has to go there, I think. Maybe even you can have the sun dancing across the water and making an interesting pattern, either this way or this way here, right? A million ways to do that. Very good, very good. What is INR? Oh, that must be Indian rupees. If it's INR. I can't see it only shows me the symbol. The triangle again, says somebody. Yeah, welcome to paintings. you see the triangle a lot. It's not what I would call an overused trope. It's just kind of like, oh, they're doing math and he's multiplying by X again. You guys never heard of rupees or something? I pay my monthly, blah, blah, blah. People just trying to throw money at me. Define rupees. Okay, cool. Very good. And then this one was by Mr. Pietro, Mr. Prague Shell. Your name's not Pietro. I don't know why I called you that. Composition sketch, a very quick paint sketch. The central idea is that the sirens sung with dwarf Odysseus's dream. This must be the type of ship. Yeah. Oh, cool. I actually didn't know what this was called. Oh, what an interesting. See, this is cool stuff when you get like further into it. You'd probably want to have a decent idea of your composition down. Or just like maybe a small sketch before you start looking at stuff like this. I think it's always best to start from your mind. But if you want a more historically accurate thing, it's fun and inspiring to learn about this stuff, and it can really help. Ramon, you kind of, when do you think the right time to bring references and searches in? When you were working on your Egyptian painting, when did that happen?
It just really depends on the painting, because there are paintings that the inspiration comes from like within, right? Like you have a story that you want to tell, or like some kind of feeling or whatever, and then you give it form. But then there are things that are inspired by real life. You're like walking around, you see something, or like there's like some kind of reference of some kind, whether it's real life or a picture, or, whatever. And so it's just I think in every case it's going to be different. But for the case of that particular painting, I mean, I'd seen a painting of that subject. I was like, wait, painting a mummy is fucking sick. Like, what is this story? I looked it up, and after that, like, because I don't know a whole lot about like, ancient like Romans and like ancient Egyptians and mummies and all that, I got a bunch of references and I did a bunch of sketching, not for that specific composition, but just to like immerse myself in that world. And then once I knew what togas looked like, once I knew what armor looked like, once I knew what like mummies looked like, then I just like gave myself free rein to just like sketch whatever I wanted. But I guess it depends also on like on your familiarity with like what that what the setting is for whatever you're working on, and again how important the setting is. It's like if you have something where the sort of the emotion, like the human scale of it, is the most important thing, then maybe you lead with that. You just start sketching that out of your head, and then you like figure out what the accessories are going to be. But if it's something where the environment is a little bit more important and like the setting's more important, then you might have to do a little bit of research ahead of time. So it just the answer is always that it depends.
Okay, yeah, that's the fun thing about learning art. So yeah. I was talking in the Discord the other day, and someone showed some palette that had like 20 colors for painting a portrait on it, and I was like, that's kind of absurd. And the person was like, well, they paint really good portraits. And it's like, yeah, that's the hard thing about art, is that literally you can do anything. You can get good and make good stuff doing anything you want. And so everyone thinks that the method or the supplies or something is the most essential part to that. But really it's like kind of one of the lesser. So maybe not one of the lesser. So it's hard to. It's everything and nothing all the time.
It's one of those things where, you can only listen to painters so much, because even like what they think that they're doing, it's like they might have a palette with 20 colors just in case, maybe even because they're anxious, but you're not seeing like how often they're dipping into every single one of those colors.
Yeah, true.
Like I put out a bunch of colors, like, like not too many, but like just in case, and then like, what if I need it, right? And then end up having like to like throw some of that paint away at the end of a session, because lo and behold, I didn't end up needing it. So but in any case, it's like workout stuff where it's like someone can be really good at one thing and still believe a bunch of nonsense. Like sometimes they don't even know why they're getting the results they get. So
okay, let me read this one. I got a little sidetracked there. I got sidetracked by the word trieme or trieme. The central idea is that the siren's song would dwarf Odysseus's trieme psychologically. So I made that literal by having a huge looming female figure dominating the composition. I even used her knee to build the actual siren island, surrounded by dead rotting sailors from the text. Oh, I didn't realize this part, but that makes sense contextually. From the text, I also chose the color palette, sky like copper and sea like wine. Okay, cool. So you're super into the text, and I think that is awesome to use that to really tell a stronger story. So let's go here. So what I did for this one is I just wanted to think a little bit more about like how do we kind of integrate this like big monumental figure, which I think is an interesting idea. Like, just psychologically, what she feels like is this kind of godlike figure, and really they are, mythical godlike figures, right? So like, let's actually make a composition that feels, or that literally represents that. Obviously the sirens aren't actually the sizes of mountains, but it reminds me a lot of like movie posters, or Ramon, I don't know if you know anyone that makes images like this. I see some in my mind, but I can't remember any names. But people that make kind of these more movie poster style images where you have like, colossal figures or heads that are partially vignetted in the backgrounds. I'm thinking like 1920s and forward, probably a little bit later than that illustration.
Yeah, like that's interesting because I mean that is another thing, right? Where it's like sometimes with the 19th century stuff, there's this assumption that like all space has to be literal, right? Like things have to be like to like a naturalistic scale, but yeah, that's not necessarily like true. Yeah, I mean it's just another tool in your arsenal, right? Like if you're trying to make this like kind of like like more symbolic image where it's not necessarily again like a naturalistic scale that you're obeying.
Drew Struzan was someone that someone said. That was the first name that came to my mind. But it's kind of like that. Can you think of anyone else? Let me pull this up. Drew Struzan.
Not top of mind right now. Yeah. I feel like Drew Struzan is like the kind of go-to person for like most of us. There's Mike Butkus too. Butkus.
His name is Butkus. Sorry.
It is, yeah.
How do you spell that?
Butkus.
Kus. Oh man, dude, I got bullied. Oh, cool.
He's still working. He's like, yeah, he's really, really good.
Yeah, so kind of stuff like Drew Struzan, if you guys don't know, he did all of the posters, for like every movie. And he does these traditionally too. I think I heard something. There was one of these really famous posters that he was given like a 24-hour turnaround on, and he pulled it off somehow.
The Thing.
The Thing?
For the movie The Thing, yeah, they like hired him like the day before, and he like just took a picture of himself like and just kind of went ham, and then turned it in the next day.
Is it this one?
Yeah. It's like a pretty minimal.
Yeah,
that's still
smart.
Insane to.
That's super cool. But yeah, I'm just thinking like these illustrative, like vignetted, interesting stuff. Let's go back to Photoshop here. Oh, I didn't look at Mike Butkus. Here's that triangle again. Okay, cool. So one thing that came to my mind with this like more fantastical idea was that she was really integrated into the nature, or was maybe low contrast against the clouds in the background. I'm thinking of ways that we can integrate her in that feels natural. And so if she is kind of this godlike figure, I thought that you do have like this line right here, which is interesting. So I wanted to play that up to make it feel like maybe these clouds are welling up from the left side of the image and sweeping over to the right side of the image. And her head might be a little bit more kind of low contrast that fits into that group of the clouds. Maybe her body also fits into like this grouping of these mountains, or this, there's probably mountains in the background, these hills and this island back here. I wanted to think also how the different elements are being affected by this too. So like she obviously is going to have like this draw on them. Right now you just have this flat sail, and the sail I think is really flattening the composition. It doesn't really make sense, right? Because their boat's facing sideways, but the sail is facing kind of flat towards us, and the sail wouldn't just be completely flat. It would be getting blown by the wind. And we also have this big rhythm that's coming from the left side, this wind, these clouds that are sweeping up into this mythical figure. So why don't we kind of use that to push out those the sail there and make it feel like maybe this boat is being swept or pulled towards her. And then another thing that we can represent is like the people that are rowing, they wax in their ears. They're not going to get drawn towards her. So I just tried to pull the boat more this way, and then have the sail be kind of pivoting, swerving a little bit more towards her, maybe to represent some sort of split split idea there. And then stuff with like the knee and her in water, it's tough. I'm not sure exactly. There's a million different ways you can go with it. You could just have a big ass naked woman in the composition. I think one idea that I had with integrating her into the nature a little bit more, where she's like maybe more towards the grouping of the clouds here, more towards these mountains here, instead of just having like a knee come out of the water like this, you could have like a little island right here, and you could have some rocks that are shaped like a patella, like a knee bone or something in there. And the way the water comes up and hugs around could be a little bit more reminiscent of an actual leg or leg anatomy. So I'm not sure that's the solution. I mean, there is no one solution. It's composition. You can do whatever you want, really. But just some ideas. And also this gives us kind of this through line that moves like this, and then these rhythms too that split off like this and like this. There probably are some maybe slanted triangle ideas. Composition's funny because you can go pick up like a bunch of books on composition and you'll see all sorts of diagrams like that where they got the Fibonacci spiral plugged into everything, or like these triangles all over the place and these strange leading lines. And some of that is definitely intentional. Obviously, we are thinking about those things. But sometimes, not everything is like mapping. Sometimes the Fibonacci spiral, like it sits in there and it looks good, but the artist probably wasn't like projecting a Fibonacci spiral onto the canvas. They probably didn't plan out every single leading line. They're things that result from having a good idea, basic design instincts, and kind of just naturally take their place rather than being like the first thing that you should be thinking of. So, I always just think of how absurd some of those diagrams get when I'm drawing stuff like this on the canvas. There is also kind of a yin and yang element with this too, right? Like you have light on one half, you have dark on the other half. So whenever I see a yin and yang element too, I'm also thinking of like what's maybe a lighter element that we can have here, and maybe what's a darker element that we could have here. Like what if actually I just thought of this. What if the sail here was a little bit darker? I mean, it wouldn't make sense for the sail to be black unless they were pirates or something, but I'll let Johnny Depp do that version. And then we could have like a lighter thing here. Maybe that's just like some light dancing across the this or something, or maybe this island moves or something. Just that type of stuff. Yin and yang works for a reason, and you can design both the shapes and the rhythms through here, but you can also design how the lights and the darks and the masses balance each other out as well. And everything is important at the end of the day. Yeah. Those are those two. Ramon's going straight through. Yeah, I've been skipping around a little bit. Sorry if you're getting skipped. We can't do 40 today. So some people are going to go home sad. That's how it goes in the JDD streets. Yeah, cool. Let's move on. You got one pulled up, Ramon?
Yeah, I'll take a look at two of them, like just overall here. So first we got Butterscotch Knuckles. So let's see. I use the mermaid-like depiction of sirens calling the ship toward the rocks, where you can see a hint of other ships that had wrecked due to sailors giving into the temptation of the beautiful women calling to them. I tried to lead the eye around from the ship to the sirens in a way that the eye would transition smoothly around the image. I also positioned the sirens in a way that one could assume the sailors could not see their tails, only their human-like portion of their bodies. I also wanted to add movement, so I had the wind, the sails. Okay. All right. All right, so we got this pulled up over here. Okay, so we got the boat, we got the sirens over here. I think that's a cool idea, like having them sort of like hiding the lower portion of their bodies. And you mentioned like connecting the sirens to the sailors by like waving at them. But here, like, you have Odysseus like strapped to the mast. So, one of the things you kind of have to think about is like, why would they be waving at them if they already know that they're sirens? Like, they already know that if they see any beautiful women like around here, it's bad news, right? So it's like, and especially if they see that this guy's already like, tied to this because it's a bad idea, then probably they wouldn't be waving at them because they already have been warned about this. But, so that, and there's other ways to link this together, right? But one thing that I would say is like, that might not be like entirely consistent in that sense. Now, I like the idea a lot, what you were saying about like, kind of concealing this, right? And maybe even like concealing this sort of like, like shipwreck over here. This kind of feels like they're in like an elevated area, right? Like these like rocks and all that, and that they're sort of like, at a much like lower level. So let's see what we can do here. And yeah, like the mood overall and the color, like that's really cool. Like I like the kind of stormy sea sort of thing. I like the gradient here. I think that's interesting. Again, having them both do the same thing where they're like waving at each other is, that's not the only way that you can link this. I mean, you can create links in a composition with basically anything. You can have stuff lining up where you can have like part of the boat like kind of pointing toward this, and like maybe this lady's hair kind of answers that, and then this lady's tail answers that, and then some other part of some other siren sort of like lines up along a path with that. So that's kind of up to you. You can have like a repeating color that links them together. Like it could be, again, literally anything. Someone mentioned this right now, but yeah, like the Dutch angle, like having like this tilt, this like kind of tilt on the camera, that is really cool. And that is like something that can create this kind of like sense of like imbalance or unease in like a fairly subtle way. I think what I would do, and I think what would be important here, is to just kind of lock in on like your central idea a little bit more. So like, it seems to me that the idea that you're playing up is kind of like the deception, right? So like they're hiding like, sort of like essential information and trying to like lure these sailors over. So, which again, sailors that have been warned, right? But let's say that we have like, just this mass of rocks, that you already articulated here. If they're hiding, like make the hiding almost like more obvious, like, like she's not really hiding the tail there, right? And again, almost like with all of these, like just have more of them. I think like have them like really sort of like peering over the thing. You don't have to really draw them in that much detail. Again, you can have these kind of like noodle people, or these kind of like, again, almost like Jake was saying, where it's like someone with like a really, really bad ghost costume on, right? Like just by doing this and sort of like, bending it sort of like over the edge of the rocks, like you can get a feeling of like the intent, right? Like of the overall like body language. And so, you might even sort of make it so that the sirens are almost like, I don't know, almost like they're spikes, or like they're like this thing kind of closing in on the sailors, because the sailors are in trouble here, basically, right? They know they're going through like a difficult strait, in these waters, and that part of that is the sirens, and so, again, the idea that you have here of like the stormy seas, I think that's like effective for that as well. Maybe showing the boat like a little bit more sort of like 3/4, makes it feel like they're sort of like coming more towards them, and like maybe, a little bit more wind in the sails. Again, they're so far away that like the expressions that you give, or like the body language like of the sailors is not really going to matter, because you're barely going to see that. And so in a composition where it's not like a close-up shot or that sort of thing, you kind of have to let like the body or the context or the environment around the character tell the story, because, your viewer is going to look at your whole scene overall. They're not like, you can't have like a tiny little speck on here like carry all of the kind of emotional weight, because it's going to be really easy for the viewer to miss, right? And if the viewer misses that, then, they, miss out on like the story that you were trying to tell them. So one thing that you can do here is to show that this is dangerous, like have this stuff basically encircle the ship. Like make it feel like danger is coming at them from all sides, right? So it's like, there's these rocks that are, like jagged. Maybe there's a few sort of rocks like even closer to them. But basically like, they're sailing here. Again, maybe this is like, again, a little off kilter like that. You can even have like the clouds. Again, you don't want things to be just kind of like politely sort of like separated out like this. Like have clouds of different sizes and have them kind of like ram into each other, right? In nature, like you don't get stuff sort of neatly ordered in that way, where it's kind of, again, like a little inventory of stuff. So maybe if we have the ship here and the ship is vulnerable, we might try to just have like everything feel like it's kind of closing in on them, right? Like, and maybe everything a little spikier than it normally would be. It's almost like, someone being surrounded with like bayonets pointed at them, from all directions. So we can do that with the sirens, right? And with like the jagged rocks and all that. And we can have some of the jagged rocks, like maybe like, further down too, like actually in the water. And then maybe we can make the storm clouds feel like that too, right? So if we're developing like this kind of rhythm, maybe like a huge storm cloud here, just something that contributes to this. And again, stuff that feels kind of overwhelming, like it just kind of feels like it's, sort of like there's a lot of weight or a lot of stuff here, and it feels like visually it's like crushing, this little ship. Like eventually you want to think of these sort of, again, like how do you express things? How do you express like emotions like visually, right? So like if you have a thing that is big like this, and then something that is tiny under it, you get the feeling that this, this right here is getting crushed, right? And especially it's like the bigger you make this thing and the less space you have between, this smaller element and let's say the edge of the composition, it feels like, I mean, they have like nowhere to escape. Like they're getting crushed, right? Or if you had something like, let's say, big, like elements, a lot of stuff on this side, a lot of like visual weight, just again from stuff being there, and a character right here, the character feels like they're trapped, right? And so it's like they're kind of like, between like, a hard and, a rock and the end of the map, basically. And so in any case, this is something that I would try to keep in mind, like as you're working. And again, you can have suggestions of the danger. Like if you're gonna have like hints of the shipwrecks and stuff like that, that would probably be down here. You'd probably have like bits of like, wood and things like that floating around, something like that. But again, try to identify what the main theme is, like the sort of more universal theme that you're trying to work with, which in this case, it's like danger, deception, like sort of like, an ambush effectively, and see like what would make someone visually, what would make something feel like they're getting ambushed. So hopefully that makes sense. But I think that would be something that's effective. And again, even just with like, just having like a path and having sort of, elements along that path, you can create a link without it necessarily being so obvious. So that's what I would do there. And then down here, Zoke basically said, I'll try to put together a final sketch for the composition before the deadline. For my composition, I chose to retell the story of Odysseus and the Sirens. I don't yet have a distinctive artistic style of my own. I tried to depict the scene as if I were seeing it through the eyes of Frank Frazetta. In the middle, the hero is being untangled by the sirens. In the bottom left corner, the other sirens are trying to tempt the viewer too by directly looking at them. Okay.
This guy took our course, by the way, and
oh, cool.
He made a lot of really good progress.
That's great. Yeah, like I mean, looking at the drawings too, like these are beautiful, right? And like clearly you had like, a good amount of experience, just like, drawing out of your imagination and like, just like playing around with this stuff, and you have like, like solid knowledge that you're drawing from. This is really cool. Like that's really, really cool. I'm not sure like what part of the scene this is, but this is also kind of like the most unusual thing in here. And I think that's it's worth hanging on to stuff like that because, like you mentioned, not having a distinctive style. Like in terms of like a personal style, rather than like say like you have to adopt a certain style because of like work. When it comes to like, because a style is effectively kind of like a series of like rules or a series of choices that you make, right? Often ones that like depart from like, you know, reality or like a kind of more like everyday naturalistic depiction of things. And so again, it's like sort of like a little set of guidelines that you have, whether someone gives them to you at work, you know, if you're doing illustration or if it's self-imposed, right? But part of finding your distinctive personal style is like, you got to just engage with like how weird you are. Like every one of us has to. Excuse me. Every one of us has to, right? And it's like, and make no mistake, like everyone is really weird. If you let yourself follow the things that you're interested in, it's going to be something that's like unusual, that's like usually not what everybody else is into. So you have to listen to that, and you have to like kind of, you know, give yourself space to like dive into that. Again, I think this is like the sort of weirdest thing we have here, and I think that's really cool. I would sort of take note of that. Um, in going through here, like I don't know necessarily that like trying to see it through the eyes of Frazetta is like the most useful thing, just because it's not. You can kind of like hop into someone else's brain for a while, and that can be useful, like kind of like to piggyback off of that. But I think one thing that would be more useful at this point is like try to inhabit the story more, right? So it's like, because here, the story, I feel like, you know, the story is being used more kind of like as a pretext so that you can, you know, kind of like draw a bunch of figures. And that's fine and all, right? But that's not always what's going to create like the largest, like the most kind of like meaningful impact with the viewer. Now again, there's all kinds of different like drawings and paintings, right? Like I don't think there's like necessarily sort of like, you know, profound psychology always in like Frazetta's work, and that's fine, you know. But I do think that that's something that, you know, is worth exploring. For what it's worth, also in terms of like, again, the drawings themselves and getting that kind of like Frazetta sort of like aesthetic, like you're doing a phenomenal job with that. And like the poses for a lot of these figures are like really inventive, and you know, they're really interesting, and they're sort of like unusual. Like this is pretty cool. You know, this is like just sort of like a interesting sort of like heroic, you know, pose that you chose, you know. And yeah, so it's really not like it's not a drawing thing. Like your drawing is, you know, like perfectly fine. And again, you're doing a lot of these things really, really well. Here, I wouldn't worry about boxes and stuff like that. Like leave that stuff in study mode. You don't need to be doing that when you're, you know, actually trying to like create, like, you know, like when you're actually trying to tell a story, you know, it just becomes like a distraction. But I noticed that a lot of the time here you say like, oh, I work to improve it. It's not really that you're improving things. Like that's not really the way that I think it's most useful to think about it. Ideally, what you're doing is like, there's not like a right way that you're going to do this. So, you know, think of it less like improvement and more like steering it more in the direction of like the story you want to tell. Like you're clarifying the story is what you're doing. It's not necessarily that you're making it better or worse, but you're getting closer to telling the story in the way that you want to tell it. And I think that's a little bit more reflective of like what's actually happening. In terms of having like, you know, just like a group of figures and like a bunch of people doing stuff, I think this is like fantastic. Going back here, I would say that this feels a little bit more, it's like a little bit of like a like a flatter kind of presentation. That's fine, but I find this one more appealing personally. Like I find it more dynamic. Like if you don't necessarily want to maybe like dive into like a ton of like, you know, story or like the kind of like internal workings of the characters or whatever, if you want like something, excuse me, something that's more just like, you know, like dynamic and wild and almost like more formal, I would say, where it's like less about the story and maybe it is like, maybe the real story is like the story of all these like writhing bodies, you know, it's almost like an abstract painting that happens to have like figures in it. Then I think if you're gonna make it dynamic like that, then lean into this, you know, like make all of it more dynamic, not just like not just the figures themselves. But in any case, you know, I think yeah, like a bit of like slowing down with this would be useful, just in terms of like more sort of like I wouldn't say technical notes, but in terms of things that you can try here. Let's pull this up and we'll pull up this original one. You know, don't think of this as just like you don't have to stay clear of the margins of the composition. Like you can have like stuff like going out of it, you know, and if something gets cut off at the margins of the frame, it makes it feel like the world of your painting like continues beyond like just the, you know, beyond what you're showing, right? And so you can plan out the scene like this and then like come in and just like, you know, experiment with like cropping afterwards. Because often like a lot of work, you know, will benefit from having like a little bit of like a tighter focus. Sometimes it'll benefit from like expanding it, right? But but you do kind of have to, you know, play around with that a little bit because often your first kind of positioning of things is it's probably not going to be ideal, or you know, I don't know, you get like a better idea later, or etc. But in any case, when you have figures like this, you're doing this well where you have like more overlaps here. But again, these two figures just kind of politely next to each other, like that creates kind of confusing space. So either like clearly separate them where there's like one person here, there's one person here, or clearly overlap them to where like, okay, maybe like, you know, she has her other leg here and she clearly overlaps this other person just to clarify like the space there, right? So it's not like it's not ambiguous, or it's not creating like a puzzle for the viewer to solve where there maybe shouldn't be one. Um, you know, maybe in here, you know, like another figure, just something to break it up so that it's not, again, just like these two next to each other. And if it is this kind of like invasion, then yeah, maybe have like more of them that are just kind of just jumping over the ship, or, you know, some that are coming from like, maybe they're attacking from all sides, right? And also like, where are the rest of them, right? Like, where are the rest of the sailors? You know, if they got murdered, then, you know, they're going to be like on the ground or something, right? Or maybe they're, I don't know, they've been thrown overboard. But, you know, I would show like at least maybe some of that. Again, as far as, you know, the composition overall, I think this is like more dynamic and more effective. You know, not every composition has to be dynamic, but yours in particular, you know, is leaning in that direction. So I think this is like a better way to, not a better way, but like something that, you know, tells a story a little bit more clearly for what you want. And so again, here, don't worry about boxes and stuff like that. But, you know, here, if he's tied to the mast, and again, if you want to like, you know, ham it up and make it as Frazetta-y as possible, then okay, like make them, you know, make those pecs like really stretch, make them like really like, you know, wrap around that like that mast, right? And okay, yeah, like this is good here. Again, the boldness that you're drawing with, I think, is like, you know, fantastic here. You know, have them like, again, like really encircle him, right? Like there's just like, you know, they're just like mobbing this dude, right? And then there's gonna be like hands all over him, and, you know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You get to choose whether he's like, you know, like resisting or not, you know, whether he's happy about this or not. I think here, like, okay, you got like one siren in the foreground. She forms like a, you know, sort of a separate, you know, foreground group here. Again, this might be similar to the other ship one that we were talking about before. Like maybe, you know, again, you get them all in a group together. Maybe they're encircling him, right? This is like a kind of total takeover, right? Whether encircling him is a good thing or a bad thing, you know, you can sort of, you know, decide how you want to show that with him or how he feels about it. But again, you know, if you're going for excess, like really go for excess then, right? Like you don't want to be afraid of your ideas. You know, if you want to do something that's like, you know, this kind of like debauched sort of like Romans of the Decadence kind of thing, then go for it. Actually, that's a painting that you might want to look up. Romans of the Decadence. It's by Thomas Couture, a French academic painter. This is super cool back here, actually, like having like little scenes, like little tiny vignettes like back here. I just, again, if you want the scene to be sort of like absurd and chaotic, then, you know, again, lean into it. You know, have more stuff. Have, you know, maybe how are the sirens like killing people here? Like, do they have weapons? Do they have teeth? Do they, you know, etc., right? and you went with the ones that have wings. So the wings can become this kind of like pattern, like maybe the wings are kind of dark. So, you know, you can have that create like paths throughout the composition. You know, you can have like a, you know, if they're in a frenzy or whatever, you can even have like, you know, feathers floating around or like, I don't know, blood on the ground or, you know, etc. But again, if you are, you know, trying to like go ham, then like really go ham. Don't do it halfway. Yeah. So anyway, that's what I would say about that.
Cool. I can hop in here. Been working on Michael's. Let me pull that up. All right, cool. So where did I go? I scrolled past a few here. I liked Michael's quite a bit. Story: the young sailor, a true Chad, standing 6 feet tall, with a gaze that says he could be like 6'3", you know, at least. With a gaze that says the world belongs to him.
Inflation.
Yeah, 6 foot is the new 5'8". With a gaze that says the world belongs to him, sails through life without a trace of fear. When sirens rise from the sea foam, he sees not danger, but a tempting promise of the unknown. He smiles with arrogance, letting them lead him into the depths, convinced he is the one in control. The ocean swallows him slowly, and he is certain it's just another adventure to add to his legend. So this is a nice, like, kind of fun twist. It's not Odysseus himself, but it's some other adventurer who's come through, right? The 1,000th adventurer who saw some hot girls on an island, and didn't think twice about how that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, bro, surrounded by water and dying of thirst. That's
yeah. Cool. So we got some comp sketches in here. So you know, you had this. It looks like you were kind of locked in on this idea, which I don't think is a bad idea. Cool. You had like the boat in the background. Probably could get a little bit more variation, or, you know, I just recommend, maybe you did too, try some other themes as well, just to make sure, because there's always things that, even if you're locked in on this one, you can bring back into it. I like this a lot. It's like, ladies, how are we? Like, where's my hug at type beat. I like this one a lot. But I think this is like a nice pose for the, like, really confident, like, yeah, just another hot girl I'm gonna get with tonight, you know, just like every other night. Except these ones are in the like half in the ocean and have scales for some reason. Yeah, I like this a lot. So this is fun. Let me come over here. So one thing that, and let me grab the original too. I felt like, I think you got a little locked in on this and you forgot ladies one at a time. I don't think he wants them one at a time. I think you got locked in on this idea a little bit and you got excited about the figures and stuff, and you started working out those figure drawing skills, because I know that's something you've been working on a lot lately and making nice progress on. And there was a little bit of a point where you stopped composing, or you were working a lot like on these limbs, but you know, what's lacking in this isn't the figures at all, which could be explained through simpler concepts, but it's, you know, what's going on in the background. Where's the light coming from? I mean, the light's coming from something like this, actually. But, you know, what is this? What's going on in the background? Also, like, this is just a guy hooking up with some girls in the water, right? And besides, you know, sand getting in some bad places, there's not a lot of problems being foreshadowed here, right? So what can we do to kind of tell the viewer a little bit more of the story of what's going to happen? Like, how do we see some impending doom of the water? So some ideas I had to tell the story a little bit more was, one of the first things I thought too, if he's just an adventurer, then, you know, maybe he laid down his suit of armor in the background. He stuck his sword in the mud or whatever. That would be a horrible way to sheath a sword, but maybe he laid aside his arms. Like, that symbolizes not really much of the story yet, but that symbolizes like, oh, I'm completely letting my guard down. So that's one way to tell the story. Another way to bring it on topic of Odysseus was to put the boat in the background, right? Like that's kind of the obvious one. So it's a little bit weird. It took me a second to try to find like some space where this boat kind of makes sense. Maybe this would be the boat still. I don't know, it doesn't, honestly, the perspective isn't all that good here. Actually, maybe the end of it would be right around there. Yeah, I think that's probably be like that. But either way, I think I eventually found something again that kind of still builds into that triangular diamond-shaped composition that we got going on here. Maybe we can use some again, again some of that rigging of the sails. At first, I had the sail down, but that doesn't really make sense because he would have docked his boat, right? So I put the sails up and then used the rigging to kind of control that flow that's going on there. Also, you had some dark shapes in the background. Maybe it's like the side of a cliff or something. It could still be the side of a cliff. I don't know. I was just thinking this feels more like a swamp or something like that. I don't know if there are ocean swamps, but maybe this would be some trees or some bushes or whatever. We're low to the ground. We're deep into a harbor or something. We could even be in like an alcove, right? And there would be trees all around if you wanted to. If you wanted to add more background in the back there, that's totally fine. What else did I change? So one thing too that I wanted to think of with the acting was, how can we threaten these? How can we threaten this guy a little bit more? Because he's so confident. With the subtle body language stuff that Ramon's been talking about a bunch. I wanted to. Oh, let me bump that there. I wanted to think like, how can this woman be threatening to him? Well, just like even a little subtle gesture of I raised this arm up and put it kind of on top of him. Like now she has some leverage to kind of push down on him. Maybe she could even be, I was thinking too, it's a little bit horny, but she's grabbing on like the side of his pants again, like just another way that she can like pull him down or pull him aside. And also if she's going to do that, she's going to need a little bit more leverage, right? So I put her leg outwards just to counterbalance that. That's going to give her a wider stance, give her the ability to kind of, pull him down, right? I didn't change much about the girl on the left, but I think the same thing could be happening, or she could be, she could be the bad cop and she could be the good cop. So she's kind of sweet and tender and right up against him. I like her a lot, the way that she is. So maybe this one's a little bit more aggressive. And she's kind of nicer, right? And then I like his acting and his pose a lot, like I already said. And then like another way that we could tell the story too is having something go wrong in the background, right? I didn't really know exactly how to show that, but maybe he's got one of his crewmates like, hey, wait, don't go. And then we got, a bird kind of swooping in the distance. I keep using those birds as motifs, but something's going wrong. Maybe it's not fully unfolded yet, but these people are like, wait a second. Or, you could even have a guy getting his freaking head torn off back here. It doesn't matter. And then also, like, I just thought, like, what if there was, like, a subtle skull at the bottom of the water, right? Or, like, floating up to the top or something. We can see through the water some sort of a motif that says death, right? A skull is pretty on the nose, but I don't think being on the nose is a bad thing, especially when you have it kind of obscured like that. So just a few ways that we can kind of, like, push the story into it a little bit more so that it's something more than... a dude getting laid. It's like nymphs and satyrs too. This is like a very nymphs and Bouguereau's nymphs and satyr-esque composition. Well, why don't we just take a really quick look at that actually? Because I wonder, how does Bouguereau, nymphs and satyr, how does he tackle those problems? Right, like they're kind of doing the same thing, right? They're dragging him into the water. Can I get one good picture of this, Google? How are you going to give me everything but the picture? There we go. So, he doesn't have quite as many of those motifs, but he does structure the body a little bit more. It's much more dynamic. The story is not quite as there's not as much happening, right? It's just like a guy who's getting pulled into the water in the story, right? But he is still using kind of the foliage to swing things around. He's tugging on them. They kind of have more or less dynamic motion. She's the one pushing in this instance, right? She's got that foot planted to give her extra weight, pushing down, swinging out. This is kind of like the guy in the background that I did that was like, wait, don't go. But instead she's like, hey, come over and let's fuck this guy up, basically. So yeah, just a few things to help push that idea. Don't get too locked in on the figure drawing when you're doing this stuff, right? Like, whether or not you give this guy a bulge or he's got a V in his pants is not going to make or break the composition. But what will is like the story beats that you can add, right? To keep pushing things. Yeah, cool. Wanna take it away, Ramon?
All right, so we'll jump in with Jacob here. A siren's debauchee. Many of the paintings depicting sirens boarding Odysseus' ship or as murdering people. So instead, I wanted to show what it looks like when the sirens sit in a green field and warble their victims to death. What does warble mean? Is that like singing? Is that what birds do?
Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah, you got me here, Jacob. I gotta. Oh, okay. Of a bird, sing softly with succession of constantly changing notes. Okay, so singing.
Cool.
All right. What happens when a man is lured into the island? What does the scene look like? I thought about how these guys are lured into the wilderness by what are essentially wild animals disguised as humans, right? I want to expose the scene to the viewer, depict a man who's temptation smiling, oblivious to the bones and danger around him. On his knees, the siren leering over him. There's been clearing of trees. The man is dirty and has cuts on him. The ship is faintly seen on the shore behind him. The man and the siren are backed by a large mass closer to... is a giant bird / siren. Oh, bigger siren. I want the bird to be subtle, even though it takes up so much space in the scene. Try modifying the colors and add more contrast. Okay. So, oh yeah, it's about 4 by 6 inches. Wish I chose a bigger painting surface. Yeah, if you're painting, you gotta give yourself room to maneuver. You don't have to make like comps like super small, especially by the time you get to this point. Oh, that's really cool. Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, you just got to give yourself more room to maneuver, but the color overall in here is looking really good. I like how everything is kind of like swirling around them. Kind of keeps the focus on them and sort of makes the world like kind of bend around them. Let's see. So this is interesting because obviously this is pretty different from what you have in like the painted ones. It just kind of depends on like the scene that you want. I mean, some of this is like the Corrales Duran thing or what he was talking about, because if you're doing like, because I don't even entirely necessarily agree with everything he was saying, in the sense that like you can illustrate like an incident from a story, right? Like you can illustrate, like you can paint like a scene from a story and make a very compelling painting. Not every painting has to be an encapsulation of everything in the entire story. Basically, the crux of it is this. Are you using this story as a little microcosm so that you can tell a larger, more universal story, right? So these characters are just an entry point and you're telling a story about something that's more universal? Or are you doing, a kind of thing where it's like, almost like, not like reporting, but it's like you are throwing the viewer into this specific world and sort of providing them with the experience of like, almost like, not necessarily like reading a novel, but like, is it more about these specific characters and this specific moment and like the event that's happening? Or is it about the specifics, or is it about like the larger principle that you can get out of this, right? So it's like, is it about a mermaid and this like man, that like falls into temptation under these very specific circumstances? Or is it a story about temptation generally and it happens to have like sirens in it? So that's a determination that you have to make. And that's sort of like, there's no right or wrong answer to that. It's just like the story that you want to tell. Because this one feels a little bit more, because it's very like stripped down in terms of the environment around them. This feels more sort of like symbolic, or like it becomes like an icon, where it's like you're telling the kind of big overall universal story, right? Whereas, it's like if you took the Romeo and Juliet example, like this would be like the story of like love and tragedy or something, and it happens to be Romeo and Juliet. Whereas this would be like, Romeo and Juliet set in a specific time period, wearing Renaissance costumes, like, you know, so it's, again, kind of up to you, like, which of those stories you want to tell. Um, you know, it's hard to say, but let's go with this. I find this like very, like, personally very very compelling. Although I do like this one too. And again, they're sort of just like different, like pretty different takes on like the same thing. So again, it's really just going to hinge on like what you want to, what matters more to you or what's more interesting to you. But just from say like the standpoint of this particular like as like a kind of problem solving thing for a composition, again, if you put them right in the middle like this, it necessarily becomes sort of like, again, iconic or like more like it's not necessarily like quote unquote a bad thing to put things right in the middle, but it's sort of it creates static in the composition. It doesn't create kind of like dynamic movement, right? And so generally speaking, you see that kind of arrangement in paintings that are like someone who's meant to be at the center of the universe, right? So like let's say like a Madonna and Child, right? You get this like fairly symmetrical, like very centered thing, and then you get stuff swirling around them that can be more asymmetrical. But in this case, if it's the Madonna and Child, then like the point is that they're at the center of the universe, so that makes sense. If you were doing a formal portrait of somebody, kind of the same thing. They'll be literally in the center of this. You know, with this, I don't know. It's like right now this feels almost a little bit more like a love story rather than like this man falling to temptation and like, you know, paying the price for that. So if that's the case, then maybe like have more of a kind of power imbalance here where like you take this, you know, like take this guy and like move him down, right? So that like it's sort of clear like what's happening. Um, you know, so I would say something like that. In terms of like the giant bird, I imagine that's like this back here. That is kind of like because you don't have a lot of space to really sell that. So that is kind of difficult to show unless you had like more room or the view was like more zoomed out. Um, you know, one thing that you could do is like if you really wanted to show some of this is like I do like this that you have like a little bit of like the background showing, so it's almost like there was an escape but he just didn't take it, right? Or like where he came from. um you know, it's going to be kind of cramped, and like if you want this kind of, again, sort of like almost more symbolic kind of composition, like, or more like iconic type of thing, then Lord Leighton is a good one to look at because he does this very, very effectively. But one thing that you can do here is like, it depends on how big you want this giant siren, you know, bird thing to be. But you could have like suggestions of feathers and stuff like that, maybe like a suggestion of a beak here. And again, you make it not particularly obvious, but what you could have are like kind of these like glowing eyes back here. Not too obvious, but something that's kind of like the viewer sees at the end, they're like, oh wait, oh shit, what is that? Like, what's going on back there? And again, you could have like a little bit of, you know, the ship back here, you know, showing like this dude came from somewhere. I would say that this and this look a little bit too much the same. You didn't make them the same, which is, you know, which is good. But, you know, it's like we can find some other ways to differentiate this. The reason why you don't want it to be the same, it's not because it's like bad or whatever. It's just like anything that creates an obvious pattern draws attention. If it's not the thing that you want to draw attention to, then it's a distraction, right? So maybe here what you could do is just like, you know, instead of having like just the thick kind of canopy of the tree here, you can have like more, you know, kind of branches. And you can have like some of these things kind of, because you have like really, really big forms overall, it might be useful to have some spindly things just to kind of balance things out here, right? And you can, you know, sort of pepper this stuff in however you need to, you know, to like, again, like if you want to create like more of a path or something like that, you know, but it might be useful to have like, again, some things that go like off camera a little bit more. You know, maybe some like little like wildflowers here or something like that. And maybe those lead to like, you know, like they create like a little Hansel and Gretel path over to the eyes of this like dormant bird, you know, or just having like some kind of like something over here. Maybe like a little like a little shine on the beak that's like not too obvious. Something like that. Funny enough, Jacob, this reminds me of Leon Bonnat's painting of Jacob wrestling the angel. So yeah, you might want to look that one up. But in any case, yeah, it's like you kind of have to choose whether you're doing like a kind of like big symbol painting or whether you're doing what we call like an incident or like a kind of genre painting, where it's like, is it about that specific event or is it about the universal principle that you get out of the thing? So anyway, yeah, I think that that might be a way that you could handle that for this one in particular. Actually, one last thing is, maybe with that idea with the brambles, maybe you could like put in just a kind of more spindly stuff like this here, more like little like branch things to kind of close off the space. So you're like, okay, he had an entry point and he stepped into this and now it's like he's trapped. Like there's no, like showing this side of the composition is like there's no escape basically. That might be like again a fun little game that you can play with the viewer. All right, Jake, take it away.
So we're nearing our end here, but we have so many like insane paintings, like really 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 good ones. So I think for the rest of them, let's do the bangers. Because some people put a lot of time and effort in. So
yeah.
I have I got Hivo, Katie, Denon, and you'll see him in a second. I'm just looking through. But maybe you should tackle Toko and Zoe next.
Yeah,
we'll try to just speed through
sounds
these.
Good. Yeah, we'll do elimination round. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, drawing.
Toko, you did 2.
Yeah.
This guy.
Okay. Cool. So let me read real quick. We got Jordan's here. Jordan. Position, lean on gesture to try and convey a process of entrancement before the fatal attack. That's cool. Reference off a photo I took in Ireland last year, and of course I used myself as a victim. The photos sourced from one of the portraits. Cool. I think you did like a cool job, like photo bashing for composition. And in general, I think this is a pretty nice composition. You had another one that had a boat in the background, and that it had different problems. I think there's some things that I really like about this. There's some things that I think are not working quite as well. I think there are some real problems kind of with like this, just having something that goes across the top just so flat, and then you kind of have this space to deal with, and it's kind of tangent to a lot of the ways that her body is moving. You get like a lot of this. I mean, this isn't bad because it's converging, but I think there are some issues with this. You had another one that had like the horizon line here, and then you had like a sailboat. That's not really what a boat looks like, but you had something like a sailboat in the past year. And then maybe you could have had, this stone structure just like pushed over a little bit more to the right, and it would give a little bit more basis on, like we've got a boat here, and then we have her, which I would kind of bump up a little bit so that she's kind of the central figure, and we can kind of have her as the highest point. And then we have these motions that work from left to right and arc around. But, just a few general philosophical things or process things is like, photo bashing's awesome, but just inherently, I didn't see any. I hope that you did little thumbnail sketches first and you came up with the idea before seeing the photo, right? And then once you get to that spot where you're like, okay, this is the idea I want to do, then use the photos and photo bash, and sure, if that's the process you want to go. But I think there's something that's so important to just being, and this is why I said earlier to try sketching a little bit before you go right to the references. It depends on the subject, of course, but I think it's best just to throw your ideas down, because you don't need any knowledge of what Greek ships look like or what sirens or harpies look like or whatever. You don't really need any of that to throw down some like nice shapes inside of a inside of a box, and think about, what are the big emotional ideas, or what are the big plot points. Those are the ideas that I want to or that you should be primarily focusing on conveying before you get to the photo references, and then you can bash in your photos and use that as reference. But again, for something like this, I think you got super dialed in on like getting all the values of this stuff right, and you started getting caught up in like getting the lights and the darks differences here. But it's not so much about making a perfect academic drawing. It's about how can I organize this stuff to be as effective as possible. So, maybe just use a stump and just do, right? And then let's get like a mid-tone and just, yes, there are lights and darks on here, but really this is, let's see, 33 out of 100 in value. And the bright points are like 50. I mean, that is a reasonable difference, but most of the bright points are like, that's 50. Like this patch over here is like, around 50. Yeah, so it's like 10, 20% lighter. I'd still say, though, that like this itself is a group, right? So like, let's just put it in a group first. And like, is this maybe a little bit darker than this over here or this over here? Yeah, it probably is maybe a little bit darker. I don't even know, actually. But like, it's not actually any different in value. And these are kind of just drawing principles in general. And then we'd have this here, you'd be maybe in this kind of foggy atmospheric light. The ground under you is probably going to be, let's say it's, dark and rocky, not all the way black. You have this black. And if you work smaller, then you can group this stuff together a little bit more effectively. Her hair should probably be black, just so that we kind of have this through line, right? We can maybe make some of your hair black, just so that we link these elements together a little bit more, work a little bit smaller so you can work a little bit more simply. Don't get super caught up on the figure drawing stuff. There's always going to be room for you to shoot more references of models, to work more academically, to do proper studies, to do individual drawings of each figure. There's always time for that. And I'm literally always begging you guys to please do that. This is the one time I'm asking you guys, turn that brain off, just play around with the ideas and think about, does this stuff work abstractly? I don't know if I'm going to be able to do Hevos here. I might need some help from Ramon, just because it's a big ass composition. Did a good job, did a lot of things better than I would. This is Denyen's. Let me go to monitor here. She wrote a myth here that's very similar. She's Brazilian, so I assume this maybe is some Brazilian folklore. Lara was... Lara or Iara? I think it's Lara was a beautiful young indigenous woman who developed admirable skills in warfare in a patriarchal tribe, gaining admiration and respect from her father, the chief of the tribe, but aroused the envy of her brothers, who decided to murder her during the night. They killed and dumped her body in the river and blamed the night goddesses for her disappearance. Turned into a mermaid upon being saved by nearby fish on the night of the full moon. Oh, she was saved by fish. That's fun. She decided to take revenge on all the men by seducing them and drowning them in the river. The myth is a mixture of indigenous myth and legends about river monster. My idea is to replicate how I remember this myth from my childhood. She would be sitting close to the river, seducing men to come to her while she sings and plays with her hair. I absolutely love this gesture right here. Like, this is awesome. It's like got this like Disney princess, like or, I don't know, Disney princess, but like it has this very like cartoonish Disney style like characterization to it, in these shapes and the way that this flows. One thing that confuses me a little bit is it feels like I'm gonna go back to Photoshop here. It feels like we have her on this front plane, and then we have these guys on the back plane, and they're like reaching out to something behind her, right? So I love the gesture of this guy, but he should probably be, groveling to her, right? Probably should be facing her, reaching out to her. I gave him a fin for a hand. He doesn't need to be spread that way. There we go. She got him barking like a dog right here. This guy, you know, maybe he's kind of halfway behind him. Maybe he's got his hands clasped. Like, please give me a crumb, ma'am. Right, and I do like what you did here, where I really do feel like she's kind of like, she's so seductive that she doesn't even have to care, right? She's just playing with her hair. She's looking beautiful. They're groveling to her. And I just like this flow. This is nice, right? This is our composition. Something like this, you get like this. So maybe there probably does need to be something in the background here. You know, even if that's just, again, like it just be clouds or the sun or whatever, doesn't really matter. You know, maybe you could have some sea rocks framing her or whatever. I like, you know, having some skulls here, especially, you know, either way, if the skulls are too, they're facing only the viewer, so that like these guys are blind to the fact that those skulls are there, or there's, you know, a skull over here, you know, looking directly at the viewers, but they're too entranced by her to care. Some nice stuff here. Yeah, I just want to kind of connect some of these parts together a little bit more, and also think of something to fill out this space here. I'm pushing through these kind of fast, moving through. Okay, Hevo and Katie. So Hevo did a really nice job on this. Actually, my advice for Hevo is almost always, well, it's similar to my advice for Katie, actually. It's almost always just like grouping values and stuff together a little bit more. I think always ties your work together just a bit more. Because I think we start to get like a little bit too like zebra stripey in the background here. And if we just like bring this together into a group, we still get to keep all of that, but it's just a little bit less distracting. I think you have some nice rocks here. I like these rocks here where they go like, there's small, medium, big, huge, right? It's normally a good pattern, and you're giving some motion like this. I think I might want to see some of those kind of aim outwards, just because I feel like right now they're bringing us this way, which, you know, there is something to say about this, but I think like some nice returning rhythms through this and coming back into the painting would be nice if those rocks were coming back in towards the painting. Let me think about kind of the big ideas with this though. So we have some like, these guys have wax in their ear. They're swamp monsters. So they see these things as not swamp monsters, but ocean monsters. Somebody said that the Everglades is an ocean swamp, so they could be both ocean monsters and swamp monsters. You got this guy here. So these guys are kind of fighting him back. He looks very happy, or maybe he's grimacing. And this guy is like, oh yeah. Let me think here. You know, I will say, and maybe Ramon has some thoughts on the composition of this one, but I probably would try to push, just with the lighting too, I probably would still try to like push some of this guy a little bit more dramatically together. Just he's like a little bit closer to the boat. I think that would make a difference. I like this idea of the storm kind of rolling in. I think that's what's happening. We got like this big storm rolling in and we get like this gradient. I'd probably push that a little bit harder. And yeah, I'd probably push that a little bit harder, even if like you even have a spot here that's like a crack in the sky. That's kind of sending down some God rays or whatever. Might be a little bit too much. And then you're close to black here. You probably push just some of these values a little bit. Just to push some of the atmosphere in this. You know, especially if you have like these white reflections, like, is that the one spot you want in your painting to be white? I guess maybe the idea is like you have this, so you're building some sort of triangle. Maybe you have like this. Maybe that was the idea. I feel like maybe it's just. I'm not sure we need to have that over here. Generally, ocean water too, just from when I was doing this, is very opaque, so you don't get like too much. You don't really get to see. You don't get to see any of the goodies under the water. Do you have any thoughts about this one, Ramon?
Yeah, I have that one pulled up too, so I can have like a quick pass over it.
Yeah,
But it's mainly about like the acting. Like, you know, I agree with all the stuff about like grouping the values and everything. I think that makes it like much more like effective visually. But also, it's like this is what happens like to a lot of the folks that maybe have like more anatomical knowledge or have been drawing for longer. Like you start to rely too much on that, and you know, it's like you have to ask yourself like in the composition right now, the ideas themselves are good. Like you know, or I shouldn't even say like good necessarily, but they're interesting, right? Because it's not really like a good and bad kind of thing. It's just like whether this is compelling or not. And I think the ideas are compelling. Especially the idea of having like some of the sirens show up as like you know like human women versus like you know the other ones like in the shadows
I
that
like that.
the sailors see, yeah, or monsters. But basically, from what I can see right now, it's like nobody wants it bad enough. You know, like the sirens are not really like approaching in a way that's like particularly menacing, and the guys fighting them off are kind of like, oh no, please stop. You know what I mean? Like that guy with the sword, like if that guy swung that thing at you, like you wouldn't even get cut. You know what I mean? Like you
That's how
have
I
to
tell
kind
someone
of
to get
like,
off my lawn.
yeah, like that's how you tell someone that's bigger than you to get off your lawn. Like that's like,
Yeah.
you know, it's like half-hearted. Like you have to sort of like commit to the bit. Like you have to, you know, like if this dude is fighting for his life, make him actually fight for his life. Have him like leaning over the thing, or like I don't know, with like a spear or like a bigger sword, or you know, just like and if the sirens are closing in on them, if they're going to be menacing and they're not moving like sort of very desperately or that fast, then I would say have more of them, right? Because why would they be menacing otherwise? Like these guys have swords, you know, and there's more of the guys right now it seems than of the sirens, or they're fairly evenly matched. So I would say like either have like a horde of the sirens, or have them be like approaching like more aggressively, where they're like climbing the ship. They're like already pulling some guy down, or you know something like that. Because you know, when it comes to the sailors, if the sailors have their ears plugged, then the sort of siren song part doesn't, you know, doesn't work anymore. And so, you know, they would have to like resort to like, I guess, like more like physical violence to like murder them, which again, kind of depends on what the motivation for the sirens is, you know, whether they just enjoy kind of tricking people or whether they just have to like kill at all costs. So, but yeah, I think the acting stuff could be a little bit more,
You might have to like take a video of yourself too, like just pretending.
yeah.
I think that type of stuff is really helpful because honestly, he has to put more weight behind it. I'd have to see kind of how somebody's weight shifts when they throw a sword. I don't even know off the top of my head. I'm sure Ramon could do a better job, but
Well, even beyond just like the mechanics of it though, like I think like again, not seeing your composition as an outside observer, but like imagining that like what if you got surrounded by sirens or like these like
yeah,
monster things in the middle of the ocean, you're gonna die. Like is that how you would fight back? Probably not, right? And so you can start to think of different scenarios of like maybe there's like a dude that's like cowering, maybe there's like some that are like recoiling, maybe there's some that like already got, you know, or like some of them are just like fighting desperately. Like, and again, you have to try to, as much as you can, like feel it in your bones. Like, what would you do, right? I don't think you necessarily even need to know much about like how to hold a sword or like etc. It's just that like if you were in this like life or death situation, like, you know, uh, how compelled would you be to you know to fight for your life?
what Hiva just said was
Uh,
that he wanted to feel more like a standstill before the attack. Um,
mhm.
you know, I would, if that were the case, you know, what if these guys were kind of like prodding them with their oars or something instead. Then like they're still like, I mean, this is a little bit more closer to the attack because these guys have kind of revealed themselves. But if that were the case, I would, think about like more like curious, like, oh, what are these things from these guys, like poking them with their oars back. I think if somebody's got their arm raised, there's got to be maybe a little bit more action. Like the chaos is kind of just broken out. Yeah.
Yeah, if you want tension, then you actually have to create like there has to be like a kind of dissonance, or there has to be like you have to manufacture the tension, right? So if you wanted it to feel like a standstill, then most likely what the sailors would do is they would get in formation. Like they would get tighter together in a group, they would all be holding their weapons, and they would be like looking out in all directions, and they would probably be encircled again, most likely by more sirens, right? For it to actually be like a real threat. And the sirens might be a little further away, right? Like in that moment of like before the thing breaks out, like what are they trying to do? They're trying to close the distance, right? And so as one of the sailors, what do? You try to increase the distance, right? Because ideally you don't want to be in this scenario at all. And so I guess it could go one of two ways. They could be along the edges of the ship defending the perimeter, or they could be huddled up around, like dumbass Odysseus who, thinks that this is like cool. So it depends on like, where they want to. It would probably be smart for them to huddle around Odysseus and actually let the sirens board, because if they're going to fight them, it'd probably be easier to fight them, on like not in the water, right? Where they could just get dragged down from like the edge of the boat. So again, that's if I put myself in the shoes of like the like these people, that's probably what I would do.
Yeah. Cool.
You do have to think about how the audience would react to this. Like, what would make it so that your story is so clear that you don't have to go around explaining it to like because you're not going to be there with every viewer that sees your stuff, and so your story has to be like told so clearly that it's like unambiguous what's happening, unless the ambiguity is like helpful somehow. But in this case, I think if you want the tension, then you kind of have to do something like that to really unequivocally show it.
Yeah. Okay, cool. I'm gonna do Katie real quick. Katie, I really like these figures in general. I like this elf girl. She's not an elf. She feels like an elf. Right? She's got this little ear here, but I just like the gesture of them. I like this. Let me think here. Look at this. Trying to think. Some of these shapes, I think, there's some parts of this I think that feels a little bit cluttered. Like we have a few. This is the first time I've said this actually. I think I also really like how this is like looking inwards. I don't know why, but seeing this actually was like, oh, I should do one where like the mermaid on the end of the boat is coming alive. That was like a really interesting idea to me. I think. So they're kind of strapping him back, or they're holding him back. This guy's got the rope. I'm gonna give you kind of the same value talk too, or I think some of the big groupings of this stuff would be a little bit better. I think we have like this motion here, which is nice, and then this kind of goes in that direction too, and then there's kind of these counter rhythms that run like this. I wonder if just positioning this boat a little bit differently, in here would help free up some of that space. I'm not sure. Maybe Ramon has some thoughts on this too. I feel like there's something a little bit strange about the positioning of this boat.
Wait, can I see the original real quick?
You're watching the stream probably, so you're probably a couple seconds behind.
Oh yeah, I was watching on the.
Let's see. What do you think?
I think I, I don't know. I mean,
It's,
I feel like
it's
the boat might be like a little too close. Like, because if
I
it's that close to the rocks, like they're already screwed, right? Like,
I like that idea of the boat. Yeah, running up. I
mm,
like the idea of the boat running into the ground.
yeah.
But that maybe that should be the main action then, right? Like maybe instead of this, well, I like this girl here, but there should be like that rock jutting out. Maybe I don't know. She can go. She can go to the other side. Hello? Oh, I'm on the wrong layer. Form. Flip horizontal. Feel free to talk over me while I make these changes because I'm unsure how to solve this one.
Yeah, I kind of do like having the sirens all on
I
the
think,
other side,
yeah.
like the way she was originally. But I guess it again, it depends like what angle of the story they want to tell. Like that is interesting to have the sirens kind of like unbothered while like these dudes' ship is like, you know, uh,
Yeah, it's like Deneen's.
torn to pieces. But if the ship is being torn to pieces, then like they would probably be jumping off the ship or being like thrown off the ship at this point. So it's
Mm-hmm.
like, you might even get a chance to have like almost like a kind of action thing where there's like a dude like in the air, right? Because like by the time that like the ship actually makes contact with the rocks, like obviously it like stops its momentum and then people get flung all over the place. Um, Yeah, I
I'm
mean
fu-
that would be interesting even just from like a purely formal standpoint where like maybe you have like bits of the ship like shattering and stuff like that. And then you have like kind of like spikier forms on that side. And then you have like the sirens with like these like sort of like slow, languid, curving forms, creating like a big contrast there.
yeah, this is definitely a pretty dramatic overhaul. I normally try to stay a little bit closer. But I don't know. This is just like one direction, right? You could have some like planks coming off of that, and right, some sort of big action here. I think I'd have to change the sirens. Let me grab the original one here. That way I can give a factory reset on this. Find Katie. Katie. There's definitely like a lot of the same like value grouping and just like organizing where your lights and darks are into bigger groups that are possibly. I mean, not everything has to have the value range of black to white. I mean, you do have the value range of black to white. That could probably be like a little bit more effective in this too. I really like the idea of the sirens being, like this super pale moonlit, like ethereal lighting. I would just kind of choose like, okay, the boat. If the boat is this, the sail is going to be white, or in 9 out of 10. The water is going to be 1 out of 10. It's going to be much darker. These rocks are going to be probably much darker than that too. Just so you have a little bit more organization and stuff feels a little bit more knit together. On the layer. I suck. This is like interesting. What if the whole boat too was smaller like you originally said? Just gonna get an extra long
Yeah.
hand.
Yeah, I think with a lot of these things, it's like, a lot of it will depend on, again, clarifying exactly like what phase of the story or what aspect of the story like the person wants to tell,
Mm-hmm.
because it's hard to just make choices about like, value or like
Yeah,
grouping
that's
and stuff
fair.
like in isolation. Like it kind of needs more of like the reason if the story is really clear, like the angle of the story you want to tell, then the decisions about like value and grouping and stuff like that won't be that hard because they naturally flow from like, just like from supporting the story. But if the story itself is kind of unclear, then you can kind of go in any direction with like placement, with like point of view, with like value organization, etc. Like it has to, you know, have a sort of like a more of like an underlying reason why.
Some of these MFs be making all their shit gray, Ramon. They be loving those midtones too much. Every crit.
Yeah, I mean that's everybody. Like that's like it's just being afraid of like making a real decision, you know? It's like that's what the thing that all of us struggle with, right? It's like
Yeah.
you're just like scared to commit to anything and the antidote is just doing it. Even if you're scared, just like you have to have a little bit of that dog in you where like you don't care if you like fuck up your little painting. You're gonna try it anyway, just see what happens. You have to have that like morbid curiosity. So I don't know, just a reminder that at the end of the day, it's like this is just a painting. Who cares? Like it's
Yeah.
you have to kind of keep that in perspective. That's the real perspective that matters. Not plotting out like 3-point perspective. It's keeping the perspective that at the end of the day, it's just a painting that you're making. Just
Mhm.
what's the worst that could happen?
Yeah. I think making either making the impact of the ship the story or making the ship smaller does help it a lot. And I keep making it smaller
Yeah.
and then painting in it. I think it could genuinely be like this small. And then you probably need a little bit of something. It could even just be rocks in this area. Um, but it does help, I think, improve this a lot. Otherwise, the ship feels like 10 feet away from them. And in this, it's like, hey, boys, they're tempting them in. Maybe she's already killed 100 men today. She's bored. Right. It has like a little bit more story. Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
We can keep plugging through. That's the grouping I have. Ramon, do you have a few pulled up?
Yeah. Yeah. So here, let's dive in with Zoe's.
I
So
don't know
let
if
me
you have
just
like a
pull
hard
up.
out. By the way, I don't want to keep torturing you and
No, I'm good.
go.
I'm good.
Okay.
I'm good right now. Um, let's see. So, Zoe, this is for my AP art portfolio. Oh, that is not what we signed up for.
Yeah.
Uh, oh God, that takes you back. I didn't do AP art. I did IB art, but it's basically the same thing. Let's see. My idea, this is create an allegorical historical piece depicting religious fanaticism. Okay, we'll bookmark that because that's the big idea. I want to draw on historical paintings of the Romantic period while maintaining a traditional pyramidal composition referencing geometrical compositions like the School of Athens, while still subverting it by moving the triangle off center to push asymmetry and further emphasize the drama plus actions. Uh, just one little note, as far as like triangles and compositions, almost everything kind of like just easily arranges itself into a triangle. Like people think that there's only like, oh, only certain compositions are triangle compositions or like pyramid compositions. That's just propaganda from like art history, like art historians that have like never had to make anything in their lives. Like anyone who actually makes
It's true.
images for a living understands that like triangles are fucking everywhere. It's like it's don't think of it as some mystical armature like, oh, I'm, like it's some Pokemon you're summoning, like triangle composition, I choose you. It's not like that. It's just every one of these compositional devices, whether it's like a triangle or a rectangle, or whether you choose a 3D version of like a box or a pyramid or whatever, they're just containers to put shit in. That's all it is. You got all this stuff that you want to say, all this stuff that you want to put out. How do you organize stuff in your everyday life? You put it in containers. Containers give order to things. That is literally what's happening in a painting also, because otherwise you just have a bunch of things strewn about. And so you just find like a container to put them in, and things like triangles, like rectangles, circles, whatever, happen to be the containers that we have.
Hmm.
But in any case, like so don't worry too much about that. It's like, and again, these things are not like literal. So anyway, I like the composition of Raft and Medusa by Jericho, using bodies sprawling all over each other to support the chaos of the scene and to highlight and critique the self-absorption one can have With being closer to God, I focused a lot on symbolism throughout this composition. Angels represent the abstractness of religion and the disconnect idealist image versus the real world. Ambiguous gender and interface inspired by the. Okay. So the I think with something like this, like you kind of have to narrow it down a little bit. You can probably have a lot of those ideas in there, but it is very difficult to pull off all of that stuff in one painting and have the viewer know what you're talking about, right? So it's like you got to distill it down to like what is the central core idea. If your viewer walks away with one idea, what is it, right? Because, it's like generally speaking, when people view your artwork, you're not going to have like a paragraph long blurb about what it's about, and if the painting can't tell the story on its own, then that's not actually what your painting is about. You know what I mean? It's like there's the intent that you have of what you want your painting to be, and then there's what your painting actually is, and what the viewer actually gets from it. It's like if you write the greatest novel and no one can read it, you didn't write the greatest novel. You know what I mean? So it's like ultimately this is about communication, and so you have to make it easier on yourself too and be like, okay, boom, brass tacks, like what is the big central idea? And then that's what you use to compel people to look at what you made. And then when someone takes the time to look into it, then, you can have these like little Easter eggs there for them, but you have to separate what's an Easter egg and what's like the actual meat of the thing. So the image itself, like, I mean, this is beautiful. And like, it's well organized, the figures themselves, like you clearly have been spending some time like really thinking about this, like, I mean, well, obviously, right? And again, like your command over like being able to like draw the figure, I think is really strong. The thing is that something like this is easily, especially if it's like some moron like me looking at it and has no context, I'm going to look at that and say, oh, they're just, I don't know, they just want salvation, I guess. Like there's an angel, they want to get into heaven, and that would be that, right? And so if you wanted to have this, sort of whole other like storyline of like, let's say like pointing out like the fallacy and like fanaticism in religion, then you have to think about how other people are going to receive this, right? If the angel is also about like the abstraction of religion, then okay, then you have to kind of abstract the angel on some level, because people are so used to seeing images like this that it's like they'll just be like, oh, it's an angel showing up to, I guess, save people, right? So if you have the idea of this called like divine light thing going on, like maybe you make the angel's face kind of like unseeable, unknowable, right? If you want to create mystery and you want to create abstraction, create mystery and abstraction then. Don't be afraid to actually like, do the thing. And so, okay, let's say that, you have the angel that is in fact abstract and kind of unknowable, right? And maybe there is some like aspect of them where like it, I don't know, makes contact with, with like this mortal or something, or like if, this is like a light like this, and you can have like a darker silhouette back here, in order to show that it's an angel. Again, try to show that more clearly. So like actually splay out the wings, so that people can tell that it's like actually an angel. Maybe you silhouette this a little bit more around that. If this is, like creating all of this light, then some of that light is going to be, this is like the light of salvation, or at least like, what this person wants to be salvation shining on this specific person. You can have a reversal here where it's like, maybe this is like an opening in the sky, or it's like, like an actual blue sky or something, maybe not as light as this light, but say like, an actual like blue sky here. And then, you can concentrate the greatest contrast here, where you can make these storm clouds that this person is effectively visually submerged in, right? This is like, this is the chaos of the world or whatever. Then you make that maybe like extra dark to make the sort of, this part over here feel even more, even more compelling by contrast, right? Now, again, this is still in the territory of like, this is just a simple salvation story, and these are just like, poor, miserable people trying to be delivered from, like their day-to-day lives, such as they are here. And so if you want to like point out the fallacy of like, say, religious fanaticism or whatever, then probably the most obvious thing would be to have, like the failings of like religion as an institution depicted on here. So maybe like, you know, members of clearly some kind of clergy fighting with like regular people, right? Showing that they're not better than anybody else, but like that they're in the mud with everyone else, right? So you can have that. You can have your crusader falling off the horse, but you have to clearly show that it's a crusader. So you can put the little tunic on him and the little hat and whatever, and have the cross on here. Um, if you want to, again, you know, show that the kind of fanaticism thing is not great, then what you would probably need to do is have at least two, right? Like represent or like have representatives of, you know, say different religious sects or something fighting, right? So like, I don't know, you got someone with a cross, you know, banging someone over the head who has a bigger cross with them, or two people with, you know what I mean? Like, let's say have two priests fighting, or two bishops or whatever, you know, like tearing their hair out or whatever. That would show that like there's religious infighting, right? And if you show that in the midst of this chaos as not something that is useful or productive, and you have everybody here still kind of like, you know, what's it called? Like, you know, scrambling, then I think that maybe helps to get closer to the idea. I don't know if it like, ideas like this are very hard to like land cleanly because it's just, it's the more complex the idea, the more chances there are for someone to miss it. Maybe one thing that'd be a good idea here is actually, again, even if this person is reaching for the angel, them not touching the angel. You know, it's like having this be unreachable is, you know, the sort of cruelty of doing all this and then, oh, never mind, there's no payoff. That would be something that you could use in there. But in any case, I would say make the storm clouds too. These are kind of like the same size and they're a little bit too like blocky. So I would say like, you know, if you want like a big swirl or something like that, then, you know, swirl it up a little bit more. You know, just like switch up the sizes on some of these things. Again, you know, with the people here, if they're in this kind of storm cloud sort of thing, again, you can have the light like hitting some of them, right? And like little bits here, you know, because otherwise this becomes like a little too monotonous. But you know, you can have like big value groups and stuff, but you kind of have to break them up with something every now and then. Now, again, I think having that light, you know, sort of right in there, again, will sort of support that idea of like this sort of like abstraction that you were saying, having like a sort of, you know, the greatest contrast concentrated somewhere around here, around the central point is, you know, a good idea. And I mean, you can even emphasize like, you know, if this person's trying to reach this like salvation or whatever, have someone pulling their hair and jerking their head back or something. You know, like just show like, you know, people holding each other back from this or that or whatever. So anyway, that's again, if you did have like the sort of clergy, you know, people or whatever fighting, it's like it'd be kind of interesting to have them like over here somewhere or just like somewhere closer to the ground where you kind of show that they're not concerned with like the divine or whatever. Like they're over here fighting about whatever dumb shit they're fighting about, and then, you know, the regular people have to figure out their own way to like get to salvation because this over here is actually not helping. So that's what I would suggest. Again, it's a pretty difficult task. I mean, you can definitely do it. You're most of the way there, but you have to be very deliberate about what ideas matter the most, and don't just like cram as much stuff as you can in there. May just ideally have, you know, just a couple of ideas, you know, and especially one central one that is really compelling. That I know you probably have to like write a bunch of stuff about this for your AP thing. One compelling argument is better than just kind of stacking a bunch of like, you know, a bunch of things on top. So that's what I would try to do. And you know, also like do that, get the grade, but realize that like no one really thinks about art that way. That's just like, you know, that's what they do for it. Like it's not artists that design these like AP curricula, you know, it's just a bunch of, you know, a bunch of fucking eggheads that have never made anything in their lives. Okay. Same with art history books for the most part. Okay, so Toko. Where'd you go? Right, so this challenge, two submissions. First composition, I chose subjects in a simple environment, such as the beach. I feel like the values could have been better thought out. Besides that, bigger things like the background and stuff could have been different, like placing them in a cave or something. See, again, you have to, like, I feel like because you've been so focused on very kind of like concrete, I'm not gonna say technical things because I don't think they're technical, but like you've been focused on some of like the mechanics of like of painting, right? And again, things that are fairly like concrete, like say mixing like a flesh tone is like a fairly concrete, knowable thing. I think you're approaching all of this kind of the same way, and that might not be the best idea for this, or it might not be like the fastest path for what you want to do. So, besides bigger things like the background and stuff, could have been different, like placing them in a cave or something. Why? Like, what would that do, right? Like, there isn't a better or worse thing until you have a reason why you would do that, right? Because them being in a cave or not, frankly, just kind of doesn't matter, right? It's just would putting them in a cave, do something to advance the story? Would it make the story more compelling? So you have to ask yourself stuff like that and not think like, oh, this could have been better. Better how, right? Like, because you're not really thinking in terms of better or worse. You're thinking in terms of, is this closer or further away from what I want to say? And to do that, you have to know what you want to say. So you have to spend more time thinking about that rather than like, say something like the values could have been better. I mean, I don't know. It's like, that's hard to say because your scene doesn't exist. So it's like, better in terms of what, right? The only better there is if it clarifies the story that you're telling. And again, you have to have a pretty locked in idea on what story you want in order for that to be possible. Like, if you don't know where you're going, let's say I leave the house, right? And I don't know where I'm going, then if I start walking, like, I don't know if I'm walking the right way because until I decide where I'm going, walking in any direction is as good as anything else, right? And so that's the stuff that I think is more important. People think that like usually the problems that you have in like painting or drawing or whatever you think is the problem is not the problem. The problem starts like way before that. You're just seeing the consequences of that, you know? So anyway, let's see. And this is all stuff that like doesn't require specialized knowledge. Like you just have to like, the kind of like, just common sense thinking that you use for literally every other aspect of your life, you just have to use it here too, right? You just have to ask yourself like different kinds of questions. So don't think that painting is different from any other activity. Painting is the same thing as going to the grocery store. You're making like the same types of decisions. Okay, so for the second composition, I decided things to be different by making the sirens, attempts of Odysseus to represent an actual woman, while the other sirens are seen by the ones who don't hear them. I feel like this is the same problems and mistakes. Again, they're not mistakes. That's not how this works. Values could have been better. Again, we'll have to think of that a little bit differently. Sky and clouds came out a little bit loud. Yeah, okay, so let's go ahead and jump in here. Okay, and the first one is from Homer's Odyssey, right? Or the first
one's from the fisherman's poem that I wrote. It's okay. It's the same thing, I think, or just the fisherman like casts a line and pulls up a mermaid. I don't know if it's threatening death, to be honest. I don't think it is. I think it's just romantic.
Oh, got it. Oh, so this one's just romantic. Okay, I think in this case, like, yeah, it depends on like he doesn't seem that surprised. One thing that I think, just like a thing that stands out is like, it's like kind of silly to like have a butt and then have the fish part after that. Like that's like, it's distracting, and it's also like just kind of like, it becomes like just the whole painting, because as soon as someone spots that, they're like, wait a minute, why would that, like if they're gonna have like a mermaid tail, it probably functionally is gonna start sooner. And if it starts like mid-knee, then you probably wouldn't have the mermaid tail, you know what I mean? So it's like, that's, that I would probably change. Let's see. So he catches a mermaid. I wonder if like, well, okay. I mean, it's unlikely you would catch it with a fishing line because it's too big for that. And also
maybe she wanted to be caught.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, like that would hurt. So yeah, generally speaking, that would probably be with a net. So that's something to keep in mind if you keep this composition going. That's like usually how if you were to catch a mermaid, that's how you would do it. But the movement over here, I think, is I mean, this is like beautifully arranged. Like I like the kind of echoes right here. This is a little too similar, so it just like draws too much attention in terms of like it just it's a pattern that you don't want, right? And so maybe like just make it different somehow. Again, what is she doing? Is she clinging to him? Is she like immediately in love with him? Like what are we talking here, right? And so maybe here you can have her like drape herself on him a little bit more. Okay, that's fair. I would say I think because there's a kind of like languid kind of feeling, it's kind of like time stretching in this moment, like this moment that they both want to last. I would say make this a narrower or like a wider composition then. Like make this be kind of this moment stretched in time. And I would probably say that like maybe like extend the tail a little bit, like have everything be sort of like more length dependent here. And then you can have the little flip over here if you want, but um, it just, I don't know. I just feel like this kind of cuts it off like a little too short. Like I feel like with the theme here, if it is this kind of moment in time that they both want to last forever, then I think again maybe literally extending things again, finding visual metaphors for this that might be something that is to your benefit, right? And you can even keep it going further. You could also have like, some indication of like the tides coming in, and that could even like help in terms of like it could add this kind of bittersweet melancholy note to this where it's like she came in with the tide, but the tide will take her back or something. This is not meant to last. So again, I would try to think of like things more like that ideally. Um, so, because again, it'll make your work like more compelling, and it'll give you sort of like things that I think are probably more important for you to chew on than just like, is this right? Because that's kind of a dead end because there is no right answer in terms of this. Um, this is really cool. The just the size difference here, like the contrast between like, the size of like this part of the sail right here versus like this here and that like reversal. I think that's awesome. The that kind of like the arrangement of this movement is like a whoosh, like that. That's really cool. Again, you're finding a common theme and actually linking stuff through it. That's great. I think probably in some way you kind of had a clear story for this, which kind of helps. I don't know what she's sitting on
She's
here.
on the back of one of the flying harpies, and then
Oh, I
behind
see.
them.
Okay.
Yeah, I had to look at it
Yeah.
for a second too.
Oh, okay. Oh, and there's another. Oh, okay, I didn't get this. That's okay. That's a really cool visual idea. This right
Yeah,
here too.
I like it.
Yeah. See, like when you invest in the story more, like you'll get like ideas that are more compelling. The color itself, yeah, looks good. Um, with the clouds, careful not to form like really obvious patterns that are not necessarily aligned with the story. Like this just creates like kind of like a block. Again, that'll become distracting. Again, careful because clouds don't usually form patterns like that. So if you have this going down here, it's like if there's a downward trend, because your composition is basically a tornado. You basically have like whoosh, 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 inflection point, whoosh, 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 like that. Like everything funnels in, hits the point, everything funnels out. And so you can make the clouds effectively like, move around that, like and maybe have like, something like this. Don't make it too obvious, but something along those lines would probably be effective. You might want to keep those mountains straighter just because you have nothing that's straight, like other than like the mast. And so like just having like a thing that provides contrast that's kind of more steadying is usually helpful. Um, just so that it doesn't feel like everything's kind of wobbly. In terms of these guys, I guess they're pulling Odysseus. Are they tying him, or I'm not sure. But
They're when Odysseus gets tempted and says to be let go, he asks his men to shackle him
they
even
tighten
tighter.
him. Oh, okay. Again, I would say like just more of them. Just like I don't know, a third guy over here. Because this is like important to them, right? And so maybe even like they're kind of crowd, and even if it's only two guys tying them down, like the rest of them are going to be like nosy. They're going to be like, "Oh, what's going on?" So maybe having like a few more of those people would be a good idea. But yeah, like this kind of central moment here, I think this is really effective, and this is cool. And you might even have like another one of the sirens kind of like flying over here. just so that it's not just like, you don't want it to be like too few in a way. Again, maybe increase the menace a little bit. Oh yeah, and this one, since we already talked about this, yeah, like I think I already kind of said my piece about this. You just again have to just like clarify what the story is, and like, each of the characters, again, like here he's kind of like, oh, okay, you know what I mean? It's like I would either have him like maybe like either more distressed or less distressed, or something like that. But the responses to this situation are not going to be casual, even if they're like tense and contained. Like they have to be like a little bit more dramatic, I think. And again, it's like you want to be careful not to think of this stuff in like very concrete terms from the very beginning. Like, don't think of like, oh, I have to have like the symmetry of the figure, and like, oh, where do the joints go, and that kind of thing. Like, try to aim more for like thinking of figures as like groups, or like, how is she hanging on to this? Like, is she like, really sort of like draping herself on the side of this, right? Or, it's like there's a kind of, the more you inventory stuff out, the more you think of like specific objects, especially small ones from the beginning, the less you're going to think about like the overall movements and the overall arrangement. So it's like, they don't have to have ears and stuff. Yeah, they barely even need to have eyes. What you want to get with something like this is like, how are they moving? How are they advancing? Like, what's the arrangement? How many of them are there? Again, like, are they encircling? If they're encircling, like, maybe, you don't want them just kind of like standing like this. Like, you might want them to be like almost trying to like go around the ship, or like just keeping this varied, and keeping this basically giving like to some degree like individual, like agency to even if they're acting as a group. Like, each one of them is going to move slightly differently. I think that might make this like a little bit more compelling.
Sweet.
All right.
Yeah. I'm working on one. So I didn't even start on one for like half of that crypt, because I was just looking at them all and I'm like, damn, these are all so good that I don't really have much to say on most of them at this point. But I did pick up Catter's one here, and Cat is really, really good at composition, so, and just kind of at these ideas in general. So let's tag team this one if you want. I'll show my screen here. So I accidentally painted on top of it again. Let me grab the original. Well, I'll show you guys the original here. So
Cat, cool.
This is kind of the typical plot, and then wrote a 4-book page. That doesn't make sense. A 4-page essay. But so this is kind of the story of, I actually, by the way, Kat, I do really appreciate all the writing. It helps a lot. So this is kind of the story of Odysseus, right? He was tied to the mast, and then they cut him free, and he's going towards this one on the side who appears maybe more human-like, and is luring him out of the the boat here. I'm at the point where I've talked enough today that my branch is gonna start crossing wires. I think that's communicated very well. My effort went into figuring out the dynamic through posing, and built the rest of the image around those themes. Okay, so you kind of started more with this idea. The design for the sirens, just human women with spiral ears that mimic seashells. There's sort of a symmetrical arc that follows the bottom half of the canvas from the boat through her legs. I can't tell if that's a really good idea compositionally, if it's not dynamic enough. No, I don't think there's anything wrong with, this is the motion of the composition. There's nothing wrong with that, of course. And for something to be wrong with it, you'd have to have, it would have to have like some sort of theme or idea that it's breaking. I think it sweeps the eye in a way that mimics a boat rocking, which I think is 100% what I picked up from this. But I don't know if I should even be thinking about that. Why wouldn't you be? I think that is what's really interesting about this, and I'll show you what I did. I also made it so that the woman's dragging him under is similar to a sail, except pulled more by gravity than wind. Oh, okay. So you're thinking about her motion as like a sail. That's interesting. I like this too, like this arc, because obviously we get a very left to right, bottom to top composition, and what that does is we have this gradient of light, and as we lead our eyes up towards the light, we're kind of seeing through his eyes, right? Like in the darkness, we have like the more ugly sirens who are maybe more of their true nature, kind of crawling onto the boat. And then he is seeing the super beautiful young siren, and he's looking into the light. So like he's seeing the light, right? Of course, it's all an illusion. But I think that all these things that you're talking about, there's no reason to be nervous about them. I think that they're doing it super well. And then she's pulling him on the side of the boat, and the boat's like rocking upwards. I love that. So I just, I pushed those ideas. I tried to make someone like, I pulled the boat down and I tipped it upwards more. I think you could tip it even more if you wanted to. And I tried to make kind of some water rushing into the boat too. Like, again, reinforcing that idea that the more that she pulls on him, the more that he's actually drowning or dying or anything. And then I felt like this area needed a little something, just narratively too. Like, he's not a one-man ship. How would he be sailing through here if he was tied down? So there are other people on here. So like, they either should be, I think, getting devoured alive and getting eaten by the sirens over here in the darkness. I fiddled with this a little bit here. I wasn't sure, but I was thinking, we had one of the rowers here who's like, and his oar is kind of being tossed off to the side. Maybe something like that. I think it does kind of fill up this space nicely. This right here. Yeah. What do you think about this one, Ramon?
This is so cool. Like
Yeah.
it's really funny because I guess maybe some of it is like counterintuitive in the sense that like what people think composition or like painting or picture making should be, like, is not what it actually is, because it's just funny to like read the apologies for thinking about the exact things that you should probably be thinking about. You know what I mean? Like, because this has like such a compelling visual hook, like just having like it also like the tenderness of the gesture, like the way that like is she grabbing him by the neck? I mean, that's
too.
it's so interesting. Like
That, yeah.
the way that he's like, has like his hand on her cheek, like it just shows like the kind of like, like the delusion of like this trance like state that he's in. Also like, using her body as like sort of like leverage to capsize the ship. Like that's so inventive, and that's like it's just such like a visually compelling idea. Also like, yeah, having the gradient from like that into the other stuff being like shrouded in darkness, like that's really cool. It makes it really memorable. It makes it like a fresh take on, this particular subject. The only thing that I would say is that like I think the boat's too small. Like and I think you can have like a thing where it's like the boat's not like accurate scale, where it's like
Yeah.
not the size that it's supposed to be. It doesn't have to be as big as the one in the Waterhouse thing, but it is kind of like a raft, and like a little raft like that probably wouldn't have like a big sail like that, or
True.
I don't know. It's
Maybe.
like
I kind of
there's
see it more as like a
like
fishing capsule, but that's what I was struggling with. Is like there
yeah,
should be people, maybe his
yeah,
crew, dying or getting pulled or lured in the same way, and I
yeah.
didn't know there's not enough room for them, basically.
Yeah, exactly. If there's more people, then it's like that's kind of hard, because that is one of those things that I do think you can cheat it a little bit,
Yeah.
because like I don't know, it's like I don't know anything about boats, you know what I mean? Like other than just like what I can like deduce. And I think like this narrative moment is so compelling
Hmm.
that I would be tempted to say like maybe make the boat like a little bit bigger or something, but not like a ton. And it's like somewhere where you kind of would justify some like departures from, even like things that like make sense. You can make like, I mean, you can tickle around the edges where like you make the sail a little smaller, you make the hull of the boat a little bigger. But just the idea that she can capsize the thing is so cool. Like it's just like,
Even if it's like a 3-man crew, like the way that thought about it is
yeah,
like this guy's rowing in the back, this guy's rowing in the front,
mhm,
Odysseus in the middle. Like I think
yeah,
that's fine.
yeah. You
Yeah.
could also toy around with it where it's like you could have like I don't know, what if they What if they all came on like small boats? Like, what if their big boats are already fucked, right? Like, it already crashed into the
Oh,
rocks or
like it was a
whatever,
dinghy.
and they got out and like, yeah, these little like
Yeah.
life raft things. Maybe they still have sails, but they're not as big. And like, he's still like, if the because okay, if the boat crashes, then he's no longer tied to anything, and his sailors are too worried about surviving to like keep an eye on him. So of course his dumbass is gonna get like swooped up by some siren. So that actually kind of makes sense, and you can that would give you a chance to fill some more of this stuff in, not too much, but like having like just a bunch of like smaller boats, and like you can have like again almost like a swarm of smaller
Hmm.
boats around, and maybe the rest of them are fine, but he's the one that's like getting like
Oh,
dragged
there's
under
some
because
big boats in the
the guy,
background, she said. Yeah. But yeah, they're kind of
yeah,
not too much of the composition, I think, to the point where I don't think it
yeah.
like reinforces that idea.
Yeah, I just think that I like just the core like kind of pillar of the composition, like the way that she's like she's got her feet balanced on the side of the
Mhm.
tip. That's so cool.
This is like
That's
the exact
like
gesture from a Prix de Rome painting, by the way. It's like the Marathon Man, or is there one that
oh,
the what's the Marathon painting? It's very similar to that.
you mean like just the guy like the like his gesture?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. His gesture
Yeah,
specifically.
yeah, I could see that. Like yeah, like the not the Luca Emerson, but yeah, like one of those paintings where like the dude dies after running like the first marathon.
Yeah, yeah. That one's by Merson, right? Or is not?
Well, he
Can you pull
won,
it
but I
up?
mean, there's like yeah, yeah. There's a bunch of other ones. I'll just pull up like all the versions. Let's see.
I got your screen up. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Let's see. Pre-Rome versions.
Just because I know
This is
that Kat
18.
probably hasn't seen this. Maybe some other
Okay,
people have seen
yeah.
this, but yeah, probably a lot of people haven't seen these, and they're very similar gestures, so they might be helpful to you.
Yeah, this is from 1869. So here's one of them. So basically, this dude found out there's going to be a war. He's a soldier, so he ran back to tell like the people in his town, and then he like ran like 26 miles or kilometers or whatever straight, and then he died after he like told them. So this is the Merson that Jake is talking about. This is the one that won the prize that year. Um,
It's
and
very
here's
similar
another
to
one that
like the
just
Hector and Priam too. I think maybe that's more similar. It initially conjured this
uh,
image, but
at least like maybe like what year was that? Oh, you mean like one of these? Like
yeah, but with a little bit more, yeah, like the groveling. Um,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, this
Also,
one
by the
kind
way,
of.
like yeah, look just for everybody to see, like this is what composition sketches look like usually. Like this is the planning. I think specifically, oh no, this we don't have this painting, but basically something like this would result in something like, oh no, this is the one. Actually, this is the same guy. Yeah, so he planned it like this, and then this is the final painting.
He didn't get disqualified for
But
that. He's pushing it.
no, no, yeah, he just took a couple people out, but because if you change it too much, they would like disqualify you. But yeah, in any case, like yeah, look at that. How much anatomy
Mhm.
is in that? None. Um,
I do
that's
like how he pushed the
that's for
figure
like
even further, right? If the figure was like
oh
that
yeah,
initial sketch, which is why I made the joke about disqualifying, it would have been a way
yeah,
weaker painting. Like he really like bowed that guy
yeah,
over.
yeah. He's like really like actually
Hmm.
begging like. And that's what a lot of this stuff is about, because like you can have these very half-hearted things that just look stupid because no matter how well painted they are, if the person doesn't look like they mean it, you're gonna pick up on that, and like anybody who looks at your painting is gonna pick up on that. So anyway, yeah, some of these subjects are really silly. This one is uh, what is it, like the Gauls? Yeah, the Gauls take Rome, and they just walk up to this guy, this like king, and they just like touch his beard, which I guess was like a sign of disrespect. So he like hits the guy that touches his beard in the head, like he hits him with a stick, and then they destroy the town after that guy hit this guy with the stick. So yeah, there's a bunch of those.
Man, those figures are so crazy.
Oh yeah, no, these are these are ridiculous. But yeah, I mean the thing with these two, by the way, just for like any of you guys that are curious, it's like they have all kinds of goofs in them anyway. Like,
Hmm.
regardless of like how well painted they are, like this dude's arms are impossibly long, and especially this one. And then like this guy, Bouland, like habitually made like heads, hands, and feet too big,
Hmm.
and like technically like fairly typically like screwed up the scale of like a lot of these things. So it's like you're not
Where's the
again, you
one with
can
the kid who's kneeling in the background?
yeah, it's right here.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, so like yeah, so this one's like ridiculous. Like he didn't plan the actual like space, like the size of the figures very well. And so, like this person here and this child are at about the same like distance to the viewer,
Hmm.
but if this child stood up, he'd be like a head taller than this guy. So like the problem is that he kind of pitched it like, wrong in the sense that like if you wanted these people to show, then like for these people to be scaled correctly like at this size they would have to be higher up on the picture, and if this were the actual like perspective that he wanted to keep, then these people would be like cut off by the frame. So he didn't think hard enough in the beginning, and he kind of got stuck with that. So it's not this thing of like how to paint or not. It's more like if you forget to think about something, then you're not going to do it. This guy could paint like torsos and hands and textures and all that stuff as well as anybody, but he forgot to do the thing, and the thing did not get done. Simple as that.
And it still won first?
No,
Or
he didn't win
second?
anything.
Oh, really? It says first,
I don't.
second Grand Prix. I don't know if that's first or second
Oh,
place
you're
because
right.
they do
Yeah,
it so weird.
yeah, he got like a runner-up thing. Yeah, you're right. But yeah, the one that actually won first place was this guy over here.
Oh, okay.
And he did a lot less. Like he didn't paint like 50 people in there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it's just that's the whole thing. It's like you don't need a ton of ingredients. You just need a few things really well cooked.
Hmm.
Whether it was for this contest or for really anything else, you don't have to like spam your work with like a million things. It's more about like again choosing a few compelling things and then
Yeah.
really investing in that as much as you can.
And if you mess stuff up, but you mess it up in a way that designs the image better, then, it's not even that big of a deal, right? Like most people are going to suspend their disbelief. It's,
Yeah,
you can
people
make
will
stuff
cut you
work.
some slack. Like yeah.
Okay. I mean, is there any other ones that you were like dying to get to? I mean, I think we've covered a good amount here. We've been going for 4 hours.
Yeah. Do you want me to take a look at yours?
Oh yeah, yeah. Okay, yeah. I forgot.
All
Do
right, let's do it.
you? Yeah, I'm right above Kat's. 2 up from hers.
Oh,
Above. Yeah,
oh, here we
there.
go.
All right, cool. We'll cap
Okay.
off with mine.
This shipwrecked sailor is half alive, seeing a tender moment in the sirens and base. Oh, okay, cool. So he's dying.
Yeah, in more ways than one. The siren's gonna get him. He's also just shipwrecked. So
yeah, this is morbid. I didn't realize this was like. I thought this is the Jake don't draw stream, not the Jake don't hope stream.
oh, it's the same thing. It's always the same thing.
All right. So are they in the water still, or are they like because you had it like partially submerged before, right? But in this case, like she's like in the water with him,
Yeah.
right? Like or on the boat.
Yeah, this is my idea. They're near the shore ish, maybe, or they're in the
Yeah.
water. She's a mermaid, right? She's not like a harpy.
Right.
So she's kind of swimming and like, grabbing him by the shoulders and pulling him back to the shore.
Yeah.
And he's floating.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Please take a look here. Yeah, I think like compared to the version you showed me before too, like yeah, the tail is like a lot clearer. The color's really cool. Like the atmosphere overall is like really interesting in this. I think the main thing that comes to mind, and and I've said this before, this is just gonna be like my thing for the day, but I do think this is like another one of those paintings that like would benefit from just like being longer.
Mm.
And because even for like context and stuff, like we have enough, with this here. Like this could be like a little bit more kind of closely packed in just on them. And I like the idea of like just more hair. You know what I mean? Like just like the hair just kind of like splaying out, like almost like she's literally like growing out of the ocean, and
Hmm.
having something like wispy, like that. I don't know. It just provides like such like a like beautiful pattern and beautiful contrast to like just how like bare everything is like on him. Um, I feel like some of these things could take up a little bit more space, like even like the tail,
Hmm.
could be like a little bit like a little bit bigger, and there could be like a little small piece of it that's maybe like coming out of the water, like just to give us like a
Yeah,
little something over here,
that was my
you
intent with
know.
that brighter spot, but I don't think some of that stuff is reading. It's
Yeah, I think we can just push that a little bit more just to
okay.
make it like a little more obvious. There's some stuff here too that like I think some of the hair will be floating, but having some of it like a little submerged, I think would be really cool. Um, I just really
Oh,
like
I
just
made it. I made it teal to
I mean,
submerge it, but you're kind of saturating it with red.
a little bit, yeah. Like I don't know. I'm not sure why actually. It just felt like sort of like because everything in general is so like cool
Yeah.
that, but I can't say that's a decision that I like kind of thought through all the way. It just seems like all this stuff that's like darker gives you a chance to have higher saturation since the
Hmm.
lights are so like sort of like cool
Yeah,
and
I like
relatively
it.
like unsaturated. And you have like some chances to do that with some of these other things. I guess what I was thinking of is like when it's like when you stare down at like shallow water and you can see like it's like in a river, right? You can see like the riverbed, and the soil tends to be like sort of fairly like rich and relatively warm. Um, that I got sort of like the feeling of some of that, and you could even probably do a bit of that with like some of the like the wood from the
Hmm.
ship. Where you can just kind of like break in some things that are a little bit more kind of like warmish here.
Hmm.
Um, I think things like the ropes and stuff like that, again, I feel like if you're going to include some of it, then you want to include like just like more, right? So just like having like, more sort of like tendrils of this stuff. Like maybe even some of it gets like wrapped around like his feet or something like that. Um, and I like how like symbolic like the pose is, just I wonder if like there's just like I like the pose is like symmetrical too, actually. It's just like I feel like there's maybe little things that we could do to subvert the symmetry without changing the pose. So like maybe like some of it is like his clothes being like torn in asymmetrical ways.
Hmm.
Like there being just like more, more legs showing here. Um and it depends on like how how morbid you want to make this, but like some of it could be like there could be like blood also.
Hmm.
Um, one thing we might do is like submerge him unevenly. So like maybe like this part of
Yeah.
his leg is like a little more submerged than the other one, or it could be the other one that's more. Maybe that's better actually. If we have like this one over here a little bit more submerged and just kind of popping out in certain spots. Um, just to like you still maintain that like the pose is symmetrical, but you make it so that like some of the other tones and the other stuff is not symmetrical, just to get rid of some of that. And another idea that I liked was something that you had done before that you had like mentioned to me, which is like the idea of having like little like fish,
Oh,
just kind of like getting out of the way and like moving around and stuff. I think like that's a cool
yeah.
little like kind of like filler like set dressing kind of element, like just like a little school of fish like just getting out of Dodge.
Hmm.
It just helps to reinforce that like whoosh, kind of movement through there.
Hmm.
Um, maybe even having like I don't know, just like subtly, but like bits of other people or whatever, like floating around, or
Right.
like some of this
Yeah.
wood kind of splintering, or like just the sort of flotsam and jetsam, like just like little bits of stuff. I think yeah, like the net also like it would probably be like folded in on itself some more,
Hmm.
like maybe those fingers would be like
It was
a
a last
little
minute
bit.
edition, so I wasn't sure.
That's that's cool though. Like I think like you maybe might even want to show like some of it like popping up over here, like
Yeah.
just yeah, like just having some of the stuff be because his pose is so like kind of peaceful and like reposeful, right? Like he's just kind of like I mean he's basically done. Um, then I think using the environment to show the chaos that led to this might be useful because like this is gonna be like a fairly like uncomplicated, like not so busy area, and even
Hmm.
like the space that her hair like takes up, it's like that's also like just again like not an area that has like a lot of visual noise, and so having this chaos kind of like with like little tendrils like kind of you know like it's like her pulling him out of this, you
Hmm.
know, like I think that would be something that's like it provides like a good contrast to the rest of this, and again having this be kind of noisy over here, um maybe the net stretches like all the way
One
around here, like
idea
it
I
just sets up
had,
like
but I just couldn't pull it
mhm.
off, was like having some sort of like moonlit, light dancing across the top of the water too, to fill in some space in that top
Yeah,
area. But I just couldn't
yeah,
get it right.
it that's really hard to do because that like let's try it out actually because like sometimes for stuff to read as water it's like highly contextual
I know,
like
yeah.
but
And
it's
this
like
angle doesn't give you a lot of context. The top down angle.
right yeah but that's why I think having parts of him submerged and stuff is like useful because
Yeah.
it like you know it shows that it's water like having some of these things like crossing through here it is really hard you know it's like
Hmm.
and here you'd have to be careful that like, you know, then because that adds some noise. So some of this stuff would then have to be a little less noisy. But like, um, but actually, you know, you probably could get away with that. I would just say like just make the wave things like a slightly different size than, you know, the than, you know, like the strings from like the net and that kind of thing. Um, but yeah, that is really hard to do. Oh wait. See, I'll just paste this in place so we can flip back and forth. Yeah, but it makes it like a little bit more watery, you know?
Yeah. I think there's definitely some elements from that. I
I
think the
get,
tighter
well, I
crop
guess,
does help.
yeah, actually, come to think of it, again, this is one of those things where you can kind of like, you can kind of fudge it a little bit because, like, now that I think of it, if you're looking down on water like this, technically because of the Fresnel effect, like if when you look directly down at water, you see through it, and you wouldn't really see reflections until,
Oh,
you know,
until you're
your
at
eye level
the
is closer to being, yeah,
yeah.
until your eye level is like parallel to the level of the water. And
Mm.
so it's like, but this is not, you're not exactly only looking down on it. So I feel like you could like you
Hmm.
could cheat some of it, and I think it would be fine.
Yeah.
But it is interesting because once we add that, it does kind of like
It helps
make
the
it feel a little bit
perspective
less.
a little bit.
It does, yeah. Yeah,
But
that's
then it
something, by the way, that like, yeah,
yeah.
for the rest of you guys, that's something to keep in mind. It's like if you want to, someone asked like how to create depth or how to not make something flat. Basically, grids. That's like, you know, and not grids like grid to copy a drawing, but I mean like literally like that chessboard thing where it's like anything that you can put down that shows that the ground is like maps out what the ground is like, you know, that is going to create more dimension. And so it could be anything. It could be like, you know, literally just like, you know, putting these like little bits of like the waves in the water, like that helps to explain at least
Yeah.
one of the dimensions of like this thing here. And it's like you can put paths and stuff. You can have like stuff floating on here. Like anything that kind of shows how the surface is sitting is going to create dimension because creating dimension or depth is just explaining the space. You're explaining to the viewer, oh, hey, this is like the width of this thing, this is the height of this thing, this is, you know, whatever. Um, but yeah, I think, I wonder, what do you think about bringing the legs closer together?
Well, I think
I don't know why it feels like,
when you have the water like that, it does pull the camera down a little bit, I think. And so now I feel
yeah,
like
yeah.
he needs to kind of flip up a little bit, which might bring those legs together. It would bring those legs together, I think.
Yeah, this is just an idea. Like if his legs were kind of like this, like it's just like I don't know if that's too.
I really like the spread eagle.
Yeah.
Not sure. Yeah. One thing I did have like kind of fog rolling in from the foreground around her too. That I think helps sell some of that, or at least just provides kind of like a nice value gradient from the front to the top.
Yeah. I think that's the thing too. It's like this is one of those paintings that's more kind of like it's kind of like one of those drapers where it's like it's not necessarily going to be like physically accurate in terms of like water in every respect, but it's kind of this like poetic vision, like because I think like this is so compelling, like this like in here, and well actually even like just like all of this, it's like it's hard to argue with that. The rest of this stuff is literally just there to like explain where they are.
Yeah.
Right. But it's like where they are is like again kind of incidental. It's like largely like because in this case the fact that she's a siren and the fact that he's shipwrecked at sea is kind of like secondary, right? It's not like the biggest part. Like the biggest part of it is like the moment of tenderness that they're sharing before he like dies. So it's like the fact that like the specifics of like the environment and all that is kind of like, it's it helps to ground it, but it's not the main course here.
Yeah, I agree.
But yeah, that's awesome.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I think we should call it there. Thanks so much, everybody, for coming to the Jake Don't Draw stream extravaganza. And I mean, yeah, the paintings here, there's so many we didn't get to, and I'm genuinely sorry to everybody that we didn't get to. It's simply not possible. And there's a bunch that I still would have loved to talk about. But really great job. I think I'm going to try to like throw some collages of this stuff together and throw it up my Instagram story or something and make a highlight for this stuff. Because that's something I've been wanting to do too, just to show you guys art off more, because you've all made, obviously put like a ton of time and work into this and have made really great stuff. Oh, we didn't get to Poifo. Sorry, Poifo. Thanks so much, Ramon, for coming. Any final words about composition?
Thank you for having me. Don't think of it as right or wrong. Like just again, try to like think of the actual story that you want to tell. See it as like a gift that you give to other people, and think of like the experience that you want other people to have when they look at this, whatever painting you're making, and trust yourself. You'll figure it out, and if you don't like it, whatever you make, then just make something different.
All right, yeah, very good. I will give you guys the gift of stretching your legs, because I'm going to end this stream.